Hey there. I know why you're here. You're looking for a story that will help you drift off into a peaceful sleep. Something calming, a little mysterious. Something that carries your mind away. Well, you've come to the right place. Before we begin tonight's journey, do me a little favor. Tap the like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment below. Even just a good night. It really helps more sleepy souls like you find their way here. Now, close your eyes, take a deep breath, and let's begin tonight's story. They say the past dies when you stop speaking about it. But what happens when the past refuses to stay silent and knocks at your door in the dead of night? Every night at exactly 3:17 a.m., the same sound echoes through the silence. A soft knock, followed by a whisper. But not just any whisper. It speaks things no one should know. Secrets buried so deep, they were never spoken aloud. Not to friends, not to family, not even to the mirror. And yet, it knows everything. And each knock brings another truth, dragged into the light. One darker than the last. This isn't just a haunting, it's a reckoning. One man's private shame is now a voice in the walls, a presence that won't let him sleep, won't let him run, and definitely won't let him forget. Stay with me, because what it wants next might not just be a secret, it might be him. I never used to be afraid of the night. It used to be the only time I could think clearly, when the noise of the world dimmed and I could finally hear myself breathe. But ever since that knock, I can't find peace in the dark. The first time I heard it, I assumed it was nothing. A creak in the floorboards above. A neighbor getting home late. Maybe even a loose window rattling in the wind. But it wasn't the wind. The knock was too precise. 3 short raps, evenly spaced, like a rhythm someone had practiced, and it came from the front door. My door, at 3:17 in the morning. I didn't move, just laid there in the dark, staring at the ceiling like maybe if I didn't acknowledge it, it would go away. My apartment is small, quiet. I would have heard footsteps, shuffling, any hint of someone walking away, but there was nothing, just the knock and the silence that followed. Eventually, I convinced myself it was my imagination. Maybe I'd dreamt it. Maybe I wanted to believe that so badly. I made it true, but then came the whisper. It wasn't loud. It didn't even seem to come from the door. It was like it floated through the room, brushing past my ear just as I turned over. One word, a name, not the one I go by now, not the one printed on mail or etched into ID cards. This was the name from another time, a name only one person ever used, a person who hasn't been alive for 23 years. When I heard it, I froze. It wasn't just what was said, it was the voice that said it. I knew that voice, and I hadn't heard it since the funeral. I didn't sleep that night, just lay there, eyes wide, heart beating like it wanted out. By morning, I had explanations lined up, dreams, sleep paralysis. Maybe I was just overly tired. I went through the motions of the day like a ghost, but the name clung to me. It echoed in my mind, like an unfinished sentence. Every time I passed a mirror, I expected to see that voice staring back at me. I told myself I was fine. I locked the door. I left the lights on. But when night returned, the fear returned with it. The second night, it was worse. Same time, same 3 knocks. But this time, the whisper said something else. A sentence, 7 words. I should have said something. I was there. My blood turned cold. That sentence wasn't just familiar, It was mine. I had said it once in my head, over and over when I was 10 years old, hiding in the hospital hallway while nurses rushed past. I never said it out loud, never wrote it down. I buried it. So how could anyone know? I pressed my back against the door that night, ear to the wood, barely breathing. I thought I'd hear footsteps, movement, something, but there was nothing. The hallway was dead silent. No creaking floorboards, no distant chatter, just the heavy stillness that made every second stretch longer than the last. I stayed like that for an hour, frozen. Then I turned the lock again, even though it was already locked, and sat with my back to the door until morning. When the sun rose, I didn't feel relief. I felt watched. The way you do when you know something's behind you, but you're too scared to look. I tried turning on music, playing a podcast, opening the windows. I needed noise, something to drown out that voice. But even with the TV blaring, I could still hear it. Whispering, not all the time, but often enough that I questioned my sanity. It wasn't random anymore. It was following a rhythm, a pattern, and I was the center of it. I began checking the door every night before I went to bed, not just locking it, but pressing my palm to the wood, listening for something on the other side. Nothing, just stillness. Yet, somehow, it made me more afraid. It felt like something was waiting, right beyond the threshold, but not quite touching it. Like whatever was behind those knocks didn't need to break in. It had already found a way inside me. By the third night, I had trouble eating. Every forkful of food tasted like metal. My stomach stayed tight, like it knew something I didn't. I told myself I was just stressed, that I needed sleep. But 3:17 came anyway, and with it, another knock and another whisper. This time it said something even worse than before. It said, "You watched him fall, and you didn't help." The words hit me like a truck. I couldn't breathe. I sat up in bed, heart pounding, mouth dry, throat tight. That memory had been locked up for years, buried under layers of distraction, denial, and revision. I hadn't thought about that day since I turned 20. I tried to forget the look in his eyes, the way his hand reached toward mine, the silent plea, and how I froze. I hadn't told a soul. Not then, not now. No one knew I'd been there. No one knew what I didn't do. So how could a voice, a thing, whisper it back to me like it was reading it from my own mind? I sat with my head in my hands until sunrise, unable to speak. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there, feeling something rot inside me. The next morning, I walked around like I was wearing someone else's skin. Everything felt wrong. The city sounded louder. Faces looked sharper, meaner. Every time someone glanced at me, I wondered if they somehow knew, if the whisper had spoken to them too. I didn't answer calls. I didn't return texts. I stopped watching the news, stopped listening to music, stopped everything that reminded me of the outside world, because outside meant exposure, and exposure meant someone might hear what I've tried to bury. I ordered groceries online, took the week off work, sat by the window with my phone camera aimed at the hallway, waiting to catch whoever was behind the knocks. But when I reviewed the footage the next morning, there was no knock. Nothing, not even static. Just a few seconds of missing audio, like someone had erased that moment. By the fifth night, I wasn't just scared. I was angry. I stood in front of the door at 3:15, barefoot and shaking, hands clenched. When the knock came, sharp and steady. I shouted, "Say it to my face," but no one answered. Just silence. And then the whisper came again. "You lied to her," it breathed. "You said he was already dead." I stumbled backward like I'd been struck. My knees hit the floor. I remembered the hospital, the crying, the blood, the overwhelming chaos. And I remembered her asking me, "Did he die instantly?" And me nodding, because I thought it would be kinder. Because I thought if I told her the truth, that he reached for me, that he gasped, that he begged with his eyes, it would break her. And now the voice had torn that lie open again. I didn't sleep at all after that. I lay on the living room floor, lights on, curtains shut, blankets wrapped around me like armor. The room felt colder now, as if the heat had been drained from the walls. I didn't dream, but I heard things, scratching, breathing, whispers I couldn't fully make out. My name spoken in different tones, sometimes sad, sometimes furious. I kept repeating to myself, "It's not real, it's just guilt. It's all in my head." But that didn't explain how the voice knew everything, how it used the exact words I'd only ever said in my thoughts, or how it seemed to be waiting for something, like it was building up to a bigger reveal, not just to punish me, but to drag out what I'd hidden inch by inch, until I broke. During the day, I started noticing things. Items slightly moved from where I'd left them, shoes facing the wrong direction, my toothbrush wet in the middle of the afternoon, a spoon in the sink I knew I hadn't used. It wasn't enough to convince anyone else something was wrong, but I knew something was playing with me, testing how far it could push before I cracked. One night, I found the hallway light flickering non-stop. I unscrewed the bulb and replaced it, but the flickering returned hours later, and at 3:17, the knock came again. Except this time, there were two whispers. One said, "You let it happen." The other said, "You let it keep happening." And suddenly, it wasn't just about what I didn't do once. It was about what I continued to let exist in silence. That broke something inside me. I remember standing in the hallway, staring at the door, my shadow long and shaking in the dim light. And I whispered back, not loudly, not defiantly, just a whisper. I was a kid. I was scared. The silence that followed felt deeper than before, like the air itself was holding its breath. And then the voice responded, but not cruelly, not accusing. This time it simply said, "So was he." My knees buckled. I slid down the wall and sat there for hours, unable to move, because in all these years, I never once let myself think about that he might have been more scared than me, that I wasn't the only one frozen, that maybe, just maybe, the fear I buried hadn't been protecting me. It had been hiding the part of me that knew I still had a choice, and I hadn't made the right one.
The next night, I didn't wait for the knock. I was already awake, sitting cross-legged in the hallway, my back against the wall opposite the door. I didn't know what I was waiting for, exactly. Maybe the whisper, maybe the thing behind it. But what scared me most now wasn't the knock itself. It was what came afterward, the unraveling. The voice no longer just recited memories. It twisted them. It started bringing things up that I didn't even remember. Or maybe I had chosen not to. Tiny, buried moments. Looks, phrases, split-second decisions that never felt important at the time. But under that voice's breathless weight, they felt like sins. At 3:17, the knock came like always, softer this time, almost gentle,
I didn't get up. I didn't open the door. I just listened and waited. Then the voice came again, low and deliberate. You let it rot, it whispered. You knew it was breaking, and you let it rot. I didn't understand at first what was breaking, and then it clicked. The basement, the one place I hadn't gone in years. After the leak, after the storm damage, I shut the door and forgot about it. Too expensive to repair, too dark to think about. I had always told myself it didn't matter. Nothing down there but mold, forgotten boxes, an old water heater. But the voice knew better, and now, suddenly, I did too. I stood, slowly, and turned to the basement door, which had remained shut and untouched at the end of the hallway. The knob was cold. The air behind it smelled like mildew and dust, and something else, something heavier, like decay. I flicked on the hall light and descended the stairs, flashlight in hand. The basement looked exactly as I remembered it. Broken shelves, warped floorboards, forgotten holiday decorations, a sagging ceiling corner where the leak had started. But there was something else now, something new. In the farthest corner, near the foundation wall, a square piece of the floor had been removed. Not ripped up, removed, like a trap door had been opened. There was no latch, no handle, just a hole. A perfect square cut, clean into the rotting floorboards. My flashlight flickered as I stepped toward it. The air grew colder. I crouched beside the opening and listened. At first, nothing, just silence. But then, just beneath the silence, a sound, a low, rhythmic tapping. Not from above, from beneath the house, like something waiting under the earth. I wanted to run. Every instinct in my body screamed to close the door, forget the whisper, pretend it was all just a dream. But I couldn't. Not anymore. Whatever had been speaking to me, whatever had been dragging up these secrets, it was leading somewhere. I leaned closer to the hole, and that's when I heard the voice again. Not a whisper this time. A statement, clear, male, familiar. You told him not to tell. You told him to keep it quiet. I fell backward, the flashlight clattering across the floor. My breath caught. That wasn't a secret. That was a lie. I'd told myself for years that I hadn't silenced him, that I hadn't made him carry something he should have spoken up about. But I did. I did. I remembered now, the way I looked at him, the way I said, just forget it happened. The basement filled with a pressure I couldn't describe, like the air itself was thick with memory. And as I sat there, staring into that black, open square in the floor, I realized something. The knock hadn't just started out of nowhere. It had started after the dream. The one I'd had 2 weeks earlier. The dream where I was back at the school, standing in the hallway, outside the counselor's office. Only this time, the door never opened, and the boy inside never came out. I hadn't thought about that dream since I woke from it, sweating and disoriented. But now, I saw it clearly, saw what it meant. The knocking didn't begin the haunting. The dream did, and whatever had found its way into my home wasn't just replaying what I did. It was forcing me to relive what I failed to do. I closed the trap door and backed away slowly, my hand trembling, as I reached the top of the stairs and shut the basement door behind me. I heard the knock again, but it wasn't at the front door this time. It was behind me, inside the house. 3 short knocks, like fingernails tapping on wood. I turned slowly. Nothing, but the whisper came again. This time, from the other side of the basement door. "Tell the truth," it said, "or I will." And just like that, I understood. This wasn't about fear. It wasn't about revenge. It was about exposure, about dragging what I buried into the light. Whether I was ready or not, I leaned against the wall, heart racing, and whispered back, "I don't know how." There was no answer, just a final knock, softer than ever, and silence. That night, I didn't sleep. I couldn't. I sat on the edge of my bed, with my hands pressed over my ears, trying to block out the sounds I imagined would come. But the knocking didn't return. The whisper didn't speak. Instead, the silence itself became the horror, because I knew it wasn't over. I knew something had changed. The knocks weren't just reminders anymore. They were threats, warnings, and the voice beneath them, whoever, whatever it was, wasn't going to stop until I said it aloud, until I confessed the truth. I'd locked in silence, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Not yet, because to speak it aloud would mean I had to face the full weight of what I'd done, and I wasn't sure I'd survive it.
I tried to go back to life as it was. I truly did. I opened the windows, turned on music, watched television with the volume turned too high, as if noise could drown out what had already rooted itself in me. But every ordinary thing felt stained now. I no longer trusted my space, my memories, or even my own mind. I could hear myself telling friends I was just tired, smiling through tight lips when asked if I was okay. But it was all performance, a distraction. Because each night I knew it would come again. Not the knock, not always, but the presence, that heavy pressure in the room. The feeling that I was never alone, even in silence, especially in silence. And every now and then, just as I began to drift towards sleep, I'd hear it, not at the door but inside the room. That whisper, "Say it." I refused, not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't know how. How do you say something out loud that you've never even admitted to yourself? How do you speak the words when even thinking them makes your chest cave in? I tried writing it down instead, opening a blank document and typing the story, the truth, as plainly as I could. But every time, I stopped at the same point. I could never write the moment, the exact moment where I saw the chance to act, to stop something terrible, and chose not to. That moment was always just out of reach, blurred by panic, twisted by time. But the voice knew. It remembered, and every night it brought me 1 inch closer to it. Sometimes with new words, sometimes with just breathing, but always closer. I started to hear it during the day now. Not full whispers, but phrases, echoes. Once I was brushing my teeth, and in the hum of the bathroom fan, I heard the words, "He begged you." Another time, while scrolling through my emails, a message popped up and disappeared before I could click it. Just long enough for me to read the subject. "Tell them what you did," and then it was gone. I searched everywhere. Nothing. That night, I unplugged the router and turned off every device. I thought maybe I was losing it, that maybe I'd fractured something deep inside. But then the lights began to dim on their own, one by one, and in the darkness, I saw a shape, not clear, just a shadow, standing by the door. No knock this time, no whisper, just stillness, as if it was waiting, patiently. That broke me. I screamed for it to stop, threw things, smashed a lamp, ripped open the door and shouted into the hallway, "What you want from me?"
And the answer came in a voice that wasn't mine, wasn't familiar, but felt like it came from inside me. To be free. That was the moment I realized. It wasn't here to torment me. It wasn't here to punish. It was here to make me confront what I had buried so deep. I barely remembered the shape of it, but it remembered. It had always remembered. And the more I denied it, the more it grew. This wasn't a haunting. This was a confession clawing its way to the surface. And it would not leave until I let it out. Completely. I sat on the floor, knees pulled to my chest, and finally let the memory play in full. I saw his face. I heard his voice. I remembered the moment he told me what happened to him. Not just the pain, but the shame, the fear of not being believed. And I, in my fear and cowardice, told him not to say anything, that it would ruin everything, that no one would believe him. I silenced him, not out of cruelty, but out of self-preservation, because I was too afraid of what would happen to me if the truth came out. He cried. He begged me, and I turned away. He carried that silence alone for years, until the day he didn't carry it anymore. Until the day they found him, alone, gone, and I had the audacity to act surprised. I said it aloud that night. All of it. Not to anyone, just into the room. I spoke every word I'd buried. I didn't hide from the details. I didn't soften the edges. I let it bleed. I said his name. I said my part. And when I was done, I felt the air shift, not grow lighter, not yet, but different, as if something had been lifted, or maybe loosened. There was no knock that night, no whisper, no flickering lights, just sleep, dreamless, heavy, and still. When I woke the next morning, I cried for the first time in years, not out of fear, but out of grief, real grief, because now I remembered everything, and remembering is the first step to forgiving yourself, or at least beginning to. Since then, the knocking hasn't returned. The voice has gone quiet, but I still live with its echo. I still sit by the window some nights, staring at the front door, wondering if it'll ever come back, not to torment me, but to finish what it started. And sometimes, in the quietest hours of the morning, I swear I hear something. Not a knock, not quite, just the soft creak of the hallway floor, as if someone is still walking beside me, waiting for the final truth I've yet to say. And maybe one day, I'll find the strength to say it. But for now, silence is no longer my enemy. It's a space I've learned to live inside. A space where I can finally hear myself, where I can finally start to heal. I tried to convince myself it was over, that after confessing everything, after speaking the secret aloud, the presence would disappear for good. And for a time, it seemed to work. The house held its breath, in a strange, calm stillness, the kind that comes after a storm, when everything's been flattened and silenced. I kept to myself, avoided phone calls, didn't go back to work. Days blurred, nights stretched, but something still felt wrong. Not loud, not violent, just off. I noticed it first when the hallway light stopped working. Then the bedroom door creaked, even when closed. Small things, petty things, easy to explain away. Old wiring, bad hinges, a restless mind. Until I began to hear it again. Not the knock this time, not the whisper either, but something worse. Subtle, constant, a soft, persistent scratching inside the walls. At first, I thought it was mice. That's a normal enough thing in an old house. I even bought traps, though I never liked the thought of killing anything. But the scratching didn't sound like something scurrying or chewing. It sounded deliberate, rhythmic, like fingers, not paws, like someone trying to get out or in. It came from different parts of the house each time. Behind the headboard one night, near the kitchen sink the next. Then from behind the hallway mirror, I pressed my ear to the wall once, just to prove I wasn't losing my mind, and what I heard chilled me breathing, slow, human, coming from inside the wall. I stumbled back, heart pounding, the world spinning. It wasn't over. Whatever I thought I'd finished had only just begun, but the worst came when I saw it. A line, a single vertical tear in the wallpaper in the living room, one that hadn't been there before. It wasn't from age. It wasn't peeling. It was sliced, as if something sharp had cut through from the inside. And when I touched it, the wallpaper shuddered under my fingers, moved, as if something was directly behind it, breathing with the wall. I ripped the paper away in a panic. Behind it was only plaster, at first. Then a second tear appeared, this one horizontal, like a mouth opening. I backed away and watched as more tiny rips formed, dozens of them like claw marks. They weren't random, they were intentional, like something trapped was trying to draw its way out with nails and time. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the couch, lights on, watching the wall, waiting, but nothing happened. And just when I began to think it was all in my head again, a breakdown, a hallucination, anything explainable, the voice returned. Not outside, not even within the walls. This time, it was behind me. "It's not finished," it said, quiet as a thought. I turned, but no one was there, just empty space, and the low hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. I stood up, and as I did, something on the wall caught my eye. Tiny handwritten words in the wallpaper seams. I leaned in to read them. It was a sentence, written over and over again. "You left him alone. You left him alone. You left him alone." I tore down the rest of the wallpaper, frantically now. My fingers bled from the paper cuts, but I didn't stop. Behind every strip was another layer of those same words, etched into the plaster, scratched into the wood, sometimes scrawled in what looked like ink, or something darker. Every wall in that room repeated the same phrase, "You left him alone." It was a truth I could no longer run from. Not metaphorical, not psychological, physical, tangible. My house was wearing my guilt like skin, peeling layer by layer to show me what I did, what I ignored, what I let die. And now the house was trying to speak back, to make sure I never buried it again. I collapsed on the floor, exhausted, bleeding, shaking. I screamed into the emptiness. I know I did. And in the stillness that followed, the whisper finally returned, quieter than ever, softer than a breath, but cutting like a knife. "Then, make it right." I sat in that silence, tears streaming, unable to answer, because I didn't know how. How do you make something right when it's already too late? How do you fix a death? How do you apologize to someone you failed so completely that they gave up on life itself? There was no redemption for that, no tidy ending, only the truth, sitting heavy in my chest. And now, a house that wouldn't let me forget. The scratching hasn't stopped. In fact, it's getting louder, more desperate, like it's clawing towards something or someone. I don't know what will happen when it breaks through, but I think that's the point. Whatever this is, whatever it's building toward, It won't stop until it finishes the story I refuse to tell, until it forces me to look at everything, every moment, and maybe it won't just stop at me, maybe it'll want more. All I know is I'm not alone in this house anymore. I never was, and maybe I never will be again.
I started keeping every light in the house on, even during the day. It didn't help. Darkness wasn't the threat, not anymore. The threat was behind me, in places I couldn't look at directly. It moved with purpose now. No more random scratches or flickers. It waited. It watched. Sometimes it whispered when I passed by the mirror in the hallway, not saying my name, not making demands, just murmuring fragments of my past, as if reading lines from a confession I never wrote. You promised you'd stay. He called you that night. You said it wasn't your problem. And worst of all, you turned off your phone. That last one gutted me. Because it was true, I silenced the call, saw his name, and did nothing. I told myself I was tired, that I'd call him in the morning. I never got the chance. That week, I began to feel the air changing, growing colder in one spot near the stairwell, a cold that lingered, no matter how high I turned up the thermostat. It wasn't a draft. It was focused, centered. I stood in it one night, just to see how long I could take it. It didn't just chill my skin. It sank deeper, into my chest, my ribs, down to the pit of my stomach. And then came the words, clearer than ever, spoken directly behind me. Don't turn around. I froze, not because I wanted to obey, but because I couldn't move. My body locked up. My breathing went shallow. It wasn't fear. It was paralysis. Every part of me recognized what was standing there, not by sight, but by something older, something primal. And somehow I knew, if I turned, something would change forever. I wanted to speak, to ask who or what it was, but my voice wouldn't come. The thing behind me wasn't physical, not entirely, but it was present. Not like the voice in the walls, not like the guilt that haunted me. This was personal, focused. Its breath touched my neck. And then a whisper so quiet, I almost didn't catch it. Say his name. That was all it wanted. Just that. But my mouth stayed shut. Because saying his name meant more than remembering. It meant opening the floodgate. It meant revisiting everything. The betrayal, the pain, the funeral I never attended. It meant admitting that I was a part of what destroyed him. Not the whole of it, but enough. And that was a weight I still wasn't ready to carry out loud. The moment passed. The presence drifted, but it left something behind. A mark, not physical, but mental, as if something had touched the inside of my thoughts. For the rest of that day, I kept hearing his name whispered by inanimate things, in the hum of the refrigerator, in the static between radio stations. Even the kettle, when it boiled, let out a shrill that almost sounded like him screaming. I knew it wasn't real, not in the traditional sense, but I also knew it wasn't just in my head. This force, this entity, it wasn't here to torment for the sake of cruelty. It was pushing me, dragging me to a place I didn't want to go, forcing me to face the parts of myself I had buried so deep. I forgot they still had a voice. That night, I dreamed of the house before it all began. Sunlight coming through the windows, laughter echoing from the kitchen. I saw myself and him, younger, happier, sitting at the table, sharing secrets, pretending the world couldn't touch us. And then it shifted. In the dream, he looked up at me and asked, "Will you believe me when no one else does?" I answered without hesitation, "Of course,
But even in the dream, I knew it was a lie. He knew it, too. His face changed, twisted with disappointment, and the room around us began to burn. Not with fire, but with shame. It peeled off the walls just like the wallpaper, layer by layer, until the dream became the nightmare, and I woke up screaming. By now I had stopped pretending to live a normal life. My phone remained off. I ignored the knock at the door when a friend stopped by. I didn't go to the store. I didn't check my emails. I couldn't face the outside world while this thing was unraveling inside me. The house became a cocoon, one filled with memory and regret. And in the heart of it, something was growing. Not evil, not demonic, but insistent. It wanted something from me, and it would keep coming until it got it. I wasn't sure what would happen after. Would it leave? Would it destroy me? Or would it become me? I no longer knew where I ended, and it began. The only thing I did know was that this wasn't over. It was evolving, shifting, and if I didn't give it what it wanted, it would take it by force.
I was in the kitchen when I heard myself speak. Not in my head, not in memory. I heard my own voice, calm, casual, drifting from the upstairs hallway. "It's okay," it said, as though I were reassuring someone. "You can tell me everything." My body locked. I hadn't spoken a word. I was alone. And yet there I was, upstairs, speaking gently, comfortingly, like I used to when he called me in panic and fear. My stomach turned. The house had grown bolder, no longer whispering, no longer hiding in walls. Now it was speaking in my voice, saying the things I once said, the things I should have meant. I crept up the stairs, heart pounding in my throat. The hallway light flickered as I reached the landing, and there outside my bedroom door, I heard it again. "You're safe here." Only I wasn't. Not even close. I didn't open the door. I couldn't. Something told me, deep down, that the thing inside wasn't trying to fool me. It didn't want me to believe it. It wanted me to hear how I sounded back then, how calm I was, how easy it was for me to lie with kindness. And now it was repeating those same lies, not to mock me, but to remind me. I stepped back, trembling. Then I heard a second voice, not my own, say, "But you didn't mean it, did you?" It wasn't him. It was something pretending to be him. Cold, detached, but echoing the same pain, the same abandonment. It sent a jolt through me, a brutal wave of guilt that nearly dropped me to the floor. And then, silence. The house went still again, but something had shifted. Now it could be me, it could be him, and maybe soon it would be more. I started recording everything. I wasn't trying to capture proof. I just needed to remember what was real. I set up voice memos on my phone, leaving them running all night. In the mornings, I played them back. Sometimes, all I heard was ambient noise, a car passing, pipes groaning. But other times, I'd hear faint conversations, as if two people were talking just out of range. He won't face it. He thinks he can hide from it. He always ran. The voices were low, sometimes overlapping, always just loud enough to understand if I really strained. And then, one night, one of the voices said, "We're almost ready." I paused the tape, played it again. Same words, same timing. "We're almost ready." Ready for what? I stopped sleeping altogether. My nights became long vigils. I'd sit in the living room, watching shadows move along the walls that shouldn't have moved at all. I heard footsteps in the attic, slow and deliberate, even though I didn't have an attic.
just insulation and beams. No one could walk up there. But the steps continued, and then came the humming. A melody I didn't recognize, but that made my skin crawl. It came from every room at once, as though the house itself were trying to remember a song from a past life. The melody rose and fell like breath. Upon it and over it, layered faintly. I heard my voice again, only this time it was crying, not sobbing, just a single steady whimper, as though even my own soul was breaking under the weight of what I'd done. I started to write everything down, every word I'd avoided, every truth I never told. I wrote it like a letter, not to be sent, not to be read, just to exist. I wrote about the last night we spoke, how I ignored his fear, how I pretended to care, but secretly hoped he'd stop calling. I wrote how I told him he was being dramatic, how I said, "You need to get over it," and how those words were the last I ever spoke to him. When I finished, I folded the paper and placed it in the middle of the living room floor. I whispered, "I'm sorry," and left it there. The next morning, the paper was gone, not blown away, not misplaced, gone. In its place was a drawing, a child's drawing, crude lines, stick figures. One figure stood alone, another lay flat. Above it, a single word, "Why?" That image haunted me. I tacked it to the fridge like a warning, like a tombstone. Every time I walked by, I saw it, that little word, "Why?" And the more I stared, the more I felt like I was shrinking, like I didn't belong in my own body anymore, like I'd handed myself over to something else. I saw it in my reflection, in the twitch beneath my eye, in the subtle shift in posture. I wasn't being possessed. That would have been easier. No, this was different. I was being mirrored, copied, replaced, not by something demonic, but by consequence, by all the versions of myself I tried to erase, all the words I'd spoken and regretted, all the ones I never said and should have. I'm beginning to believe this isn't just a haunting, it's a correction, like time, space and memory are folding in on themselves, trying to realign what I broke. And now the house, my voice, the shadows, they're all participating, all pulling me towards some reckoning I can't define. Every lie I told is now a voice in the room. Every moment I ignored is now a crack in the floor. And every part of me that stayed silent is now screaming from the walls. I don't know what's coming. I don't know what happens when the house finishes becoming me, but I can feel it. It's close, and when it arrives, I don't think I'll be the one left standing.
It started speaking when I stayed quiet. Not aloud, but inside, a presence in my lungs, in the way my breath shuddered at night. At first I thought it was anxiety, the kind that clutches your ribs like a hand. But this was different. It exhaled with me. It sighed when I sighed. And worse, it started finishing my thoughts. The ones I hadn't said aloud. I would be thinking about locking the door, and the voice inside would say, "It's already locked." I'd wonder if I was still sane, and it would answer, "Does that matter anymore?" It wasn't trying to scare me. It was becoming me. And with each passing day, I could feel more of my silence being replaced by its certainty. The walls began to sweat, not with water, with something invisible, heavy, thick, a feeling that clung to me every time I walked from one room to another. I couldn't stand mirrors anymore, not because they reflected something horrifying, but because they reflected too accurately. My face, my posture,
My eyes, they weren't changing, but I was seeing them differently. The lines around my mouth that weren't there yesterday, the slight curve of my spine, the way I blinked a fraction too slowly. It was subtle, but unmistakable. I wasn't watching myself age. I was watching myself become what the house wanted. A vessel, a voice box, a silhouette of what I used to be. I tried leaving, bags packed, shoes on, keys in hand. I made it to the front door. I even touched the handle, but my reflection in the hallway mirror stepped closer when I didn't. Not fast, just enough to notice. I froze. Every instinct screamed for me to run, but the reflection lifted its hand, placed one finger to its lips, and smiled. I don't know what stopped me more, the smile, or the fact that I smiled back. I hadn't told my face to do that. My body betrayed me. So I stepped away from the door, dropped the keys, and sat on the floor like a child who'd been scolded. The house didn't lock me in. I just stayed, because deep down, I knew it was too late to leave the place where I'd already surrendered my truth. Nights became something else entirely. Not dark, not quiet, just hollow. Like the time between thunder and lightning, stretched for hours. I'd lie in bed, listening to the rhythm of breathing that wasn't mine, soft, methodical, centered in the room with me. Once I whispered, "Who are you?" And the answer came instantly. "You, if you'd told the truth." I didn't ask again, because I was starting to believe it, that maybe this wasn't a ghost, or a demon, or some ancient evil. Maybe it was me, a shadow built from every suppressed memory, every dismissed pain, every secret I'd buried too deep. Maybe this was my reckoning, my echo, and now it was just finishing what I never had the courage to begin. One morning, I found the basement door open. I don't remember unlocking it. I never used it. The light bulb was blown, but something glowed at the bottom of the steps, faint, pulsing. I descended, each step groaning like a warning. At the bottom I saw them, pages, hundreds of them, scattered across the floor like fallen leaves. Each one had a sentence, short, simple, devastating. I didn't answer. I told him to grow up. I knew he was slipping. Some were dated, some weren't, but they were all mine. Not physically. I'd never written these, but they were mine. Thoughts I'd had, moments I'd dismissed, and suddenly I understood. This thing, this voice, it was made of memory. It had been stitching together everything I never wanted to feel again. And now, it was laying it all bare. That night, the knocking returned. But this time, it didn't come from the door. It came from inside the walls, from the floorboards, from beneath the bed. Not loud, not frantic, rhythmic, like a message in code. I covered my ears, but it didn't matter. It wasn't sound anymore. It was inside me. Each knock struck the same nerve over and over, and with every hit, I remembered something else. The messages I left on read, the calls I didn't return, the night he told me he was scared, and I laughed, not because it was funny, but because I didn't know how else to respond. The knocks weren't demanding entrance anymore. They were demanding truth. I don't know what I am now. Not exactly. I still look like me. I still speak with my voice. But something has shifted permanently. I no longer sleep. I no longer cry. I just wait. I wait for the voice to speak again, though I'm starting to wonder if it ever really stopped. Maybe it's not something I hear. Maybe it's something I've become. I think that's what it wanted all along. Not to torment, not to haunt, but to merge. To finish the story I never dared tell. And now that it has, the silence isn't empty anymore. It breathes, it remembers, it watches through my eyes. And sometimes, when I pass by the mirror, I see him there, not angry, not vengeful, just watching me live the life I tried to live without him. I hadn't spoken to anyone in days. Not really. Not since the night the knocking stopped, or more accurately, moved inside me. I thought the worst had passed. That maybe, just maybe, the silence meant survival. So when the phone rang that morning, my first instinct was to let it die out like all the others. But something in me, something fragile and curious, reached for it. I answered, "Hello?" A pause, and then, clear as a bell, came the voice of a stranger. "You told him he was being a burden." My grip tightened. I didn't respond. The line buzzed quietly. Then the stranger continued, "That's what you said the night before he disappeared." I didn't ask who it was. I didn't need to, because whoever it was, whatever it was, had taken what lived in my walls and carried it outside. I hung up, hands trembling. My heart was thudding so loudly, I thought it might drown out my thoughts, but it didn't. The words echoed, pure and unbroken. "You told him he was being a burden." I had. Not exactly in those words, but close enough, and never aloud. Never where anyone could have heard. So how did this voice, this stranger, know? I checked the call log. No number, just unknown. Not blocked, not missed, just unidentified. I sat back, staring at the phone, like it was some cursed object. It hadn't rung again, but the damage was already done. The silence wasn't just not empty. Now it was connected, carried like a disease, spoken through mouths I'd never seen. Later that day, I left the house. I walked for miles, aimless and detached, until I reached a small coffee shop downtown. I hadn't been there in years. A place I used to visit back when life still felt like something I was building, not escaping. I sat in a corner, ordered nothing, just watched. People talked, laughed, lived. And for a moment I wondered if maybe I could step back into that world. If this nightmare was just a psychotic break, something explainable. But then a child walked by my table. 6, maybe 7. He stopped, looked at me with wide, unreadable eyes, and whispered, "He waited for you to call." He didn't smile, didn't blink, just kept walking with his mother, like he hadn't said a thing. And I sat there, cold spreading through my bones like winter. It had found new mouths. When I returned home, something was waiting on the front step. A cassette tape, no label, just a plain grey plastic shell, weathered and old. I didn't own a tape player, but I knew someone who might. An old neighbor who hoarded outdated tech in his garage, like relics. I brought it to him without speaking, just held it out. He nodded, as if this sort of thing happened often, and led me to the back of the garage. We found a dusty player, plugged it in, and hit play. Static. Then a low hum. Then my voice. Not exactly. It sounded like me, but younger, angrier. "You think everyone should drop everything for you," it said. "You think your pain is special. It's not. You're not." The neighbor looked at me, eyebrows raised. Old demo. I shook my head slowly, heart in my throat. "No," I whispered. "That's something I never said, but I thought it." The tape ended without fanfare. My neighbor didn't ask questions. He just handed it back like it was cursed. I didn't take it. I left it there, walked out into the street, and breathed air like it was a privilege. The world hadn't changed. but something fundamental in it had. I saw it in the shadows, people cast slightly off, just a second delayed. I saw it in reflections, windows, puddles, store glass, where the image stared too long. Something had cracked open when I admitted the truth. Something deep and patient. And now it was speaking through strangers, through children, through forgotten media. It wasn't haunting me anymore. It was amplifying me. That night, I dreamed of a funeral. No casket, no guests, just rows and rows of empty chairs. I stood at a podium, trying to speak, but my mouth was full of water, thick, heavy. I turned to leave, but the exit was gone. Only mirrors surrounded me now, all showing different versions of me. Some older, some younger, some dressed in black, some bleeding from the mouth. They all spoke at once, a chorus of versions, chanting the same sentence. He died waiting for your voice. I woke up choking, sheets soaked, not sweat, tears, mine, unwilling, surging from somewhere I didn't know still existed. I'd spent so long repressing grief that when it finally arrived, it was volcanic. I think it's learning, adapting, no longer content with just echoing my guilt. Now it wants to reconstruct what I destroyed, not to fix it, but to show me what could have been. Every time I close my eyes, it recreates conversations that never happened. Him calling, me answering, us laughing, forgiving, understanding. And then silence, not because he's gone, but because I never let it happen. This is no longer about punishment. It's about memory and its revenge. The house was just the beginning. Now the entire world is laced with the residue of the secret I never confessed. And the voice, it's not in the walls anymore. It's in everyone. The grocery store was the final straw. I hadn't wanted to go, but the empty fridge forced me out of the house. I kept my head down, hood up, avoiding eyes, avoiding the possibility of more whispers that weren't meant to be heard. But it didn't matter anymore. The moment I reached for a loaf of bread, the woman beside me said, as if casually remarking on the weather, "You didn't mean for him to do it, but you knew he might." She didn't even look at me. She just picked up her items and walked away. I stood frozen, my fingertips brushing plastic packaging, but my heart felt like glass in a vice. These weren't coincidences. This wasn't madness. People were saying things only I could possibly know. And now I couldn't tell where the line was anymore, between strangers and messengers, the living and the haunted. I rushed out without buying anything. My mind screamed for logic, for science, for reason. But none of those voices came, only memory. That last night. The one I never told anyone about. The one I twisted in my mind 100 different ways until I could almost believe I had done nothing wrong. He was always dramatic. He said things he didn't mean. I didn't think he would actually go through with it. But the truth was simpler, sharper. I had seen the signs, heard the cracks in his voice, read the silence between his texts. And still I left him on read. Because I was tired. Because I thought I had time. Because I wanted to punish him for making me feel responsible for him again. So I said nothing. And then he was gone. That night I unplugged everything. Internet, phone, power strip. I sat in the dark, thinking I could escape it if I just made the world quiet again. But then came the knocking, not outside, not within the house. From under the floorboards, thump, 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 like a heartbeat. I didn't want to acknowledge. I covered my ears, but it didn't matter. The sound lived inside me now. Then a voice, soft, like a whisper from inside my chest. You don't get to turn it off, not when you already turned your back. I rocked back and forth, whispering apologies I should have said years ago. I didn't care how pathetic I sounded, but no voice replied. Just the rhythm, a steady, cruel metronome, as if measuring the time I let slip away. The next day, I decided to test reality. I approached a barista, young, friendly, unaware. I ordered a coffee, smiled, forced small talk. Then I asked her, "Do you believe in ghosts?" She laughed, said something about bad Tinder dates, and handed me my drink. I almost relaxed, almost. But then as I turned to leave, she leaned over the counter, her voice suddenly lower. "He asked you for help, and you ignored him." I didn't flinch. I couldn't. I walked out calmly, even though my knees wanted to collapse. It wasn't just some people, it was everyone. And I was starting to wonder if this voice, this presence, had rooted itself into every part of the world around me. Not haunting me, no, replacing reality itself with something tailored to my guilt. I stopped talking, stopped interacting. I wore headphones in public, kept my head down. But even that didn't work. The voices found new ways in. Graffiti on walls, lyrics in passing songs, ads that seemed to whisper my sins. I saw a billboard that read, "He reached out, you reached away." A bus drove by with a poster that said, "Guilt is louder than silence." Even the digital world wasn't safe. Autocomplete suggestions finishing my darkest thoughts. Emails with subject lines that said, "Still think you did the right thing." The world had become a mirror, not of who I was, but of what I refused to be accountable for. The knocking hadn't stopped. It had just taken on new forms, and each one was shaped like a reminder. I stopped sleeping, not out of fear, out of guilt. Because every time I closed my eyes, I saw him, not in torment, in disappointment, sitting across from me at our old hangout spot, swinging his foot, sipping a soda, smiling that tired smile. And every time I tried to speak, he'd interrupt gently, "Just be there." Then the dream would rewind, repeat, and his voice would soften further. "You didn't even have to say anything, just not leave." It hurt more than screaming, more than any horror, because it was true. There were no monsters in these dreams, just echoes of love, withheld, kindness delayed, compassion denied, the things that can't be buried, only postponed. And now they were blooming. By the end of the week, I found myself speaking to him aloud, not because I believed he was there, but because it was the only time I felt honest. I sat on the edge of my bed and whispered everything, the fear, the guilt, the shame, the way I missed him in ways I didn't even understand back then. I begged for forgiveness. I had no right to receive. I asked questions I'd never dared ask. And when I finally fell silent, something changed. The room didn't feel lighter, but I did. For the first time, the knocking stopped. Not because the horror ended, but because I had faced it. The presence was still there, watching, listening, but it didn't need to knock anymore, because I had finally opened the door. I used to think grief was private, that mourning happened in closed doors, in the quiet hours when no one was watching. But now, I hear his name on strangers' lips. I walk past conversations, and someone will casually say it, not with recognition, not with purpose, but like they'd always known him, as if he were theirs to grieve too. A woman passing me on the sidewalk. He was just too tired, a man on a phone at the bus stop. He used to call every night. Then he stopped. It didn't matter where I was, the grocery aisle, the laundromat, a bookstore, I'd hear his name. Always gentle, always mournful, never accusatory. That was the worst part. It wasn't rage the world gave me back. It was remorse. And somehow, that burned deeper. I began writing his name down, over and over, on napkins, in notebooks, on the corners of receipts, just to see if doing so would dull the sharp edge of it. But it didn't. Each letter felt heavier. I found myself remembering details I had forgotten. His laugh after a bad joke. The way he'd always tilt his head when he was trying not to cry. I'd buried so much, not just the truth, but the essence of him, all to avoid the discomfort of guilt. And now, with every stranger speaking his name like a hymn, it was clear I no longer had the right to keep his memory to myself. I had tried to contain the grief, but it had leaked into the world, into people, into words. Then came the letters, handwritten, no return address, always arriving at night, slipped under the door. The paper was thick, slightly yellowed, like something from another time. The ink smudged slightly, as if written with urgency, but it was the content that chilled me. We remember him, one read, even if you tried not to. Another, he visits us in dreams, the ones you locked away. The most recent was different, a list, names I didn't recognize. Then at the bottom, you're next. I read that one aloud by accident, not realizing I'd spoken it until the lamp beside me flickered and buzzed. Not a power surge, not faulty wiring. It was like the room responded, as if I had activated something, just by acknowledging the words. I tried to call someone, anyone. I picked up the phone and dialed a number I hadn't touched in years. An old friend who once knew him, back before the silence swallowed us both. The phone rang 3 times, then a voice answered, but it wasn't hers, it was his. You waited too long, he said. Calm, not angry, not surprised, just disappointed. I slammed the phone down and stared at it like it had grown teeth. I didn't try again. There were no more people left who would believe me. Maybe there never were. The world had changed, or I had. And now reality was bending itself around what I refused to face, shaping itself into a penance I couldn't escape. I stopped going outside. If the world wanted to echo my sins, I'd mute it. I sealed the windows, drew every curtain, left the lights off for days. But even that didn't work, because the voice didn't need the world anymore. Now it was inside my voice. I heard myself whisper things I hadn't meant to say, words that weren't mine. I'd wake up with a sore throat, and recordings on my phone I never remembered making. In one I said, "You should have answered when he called." In another, "He died thinking you hated him." Each message ended with a silence that somehow felt conscious, like the void itself was listening, waiting for me to admit that it was right. Then I remembered something, a conversation we'd had, long ago, during one of his darker nights. He told me, if I go, don't let me vanish. I'd laughed it off then, told him not to talk like that. But now those words had teeth. They clung to the inside of my ribs, like vines. Don't let me vanish. That was the deal, the one I broke. Not by forgetting him, I never truly did, but by refusing to carry his story forward, by acting like grief was an inconvenience. Now the story was carrying itself, through voices, through strangers, through every crack in the world where silence used to live. It was no longer about me trying to forget. It was about him refusing to be erased. And maybe in some twisted way, this was love, not punishment, but memory fighting back, forcing me to reckon with a truth I tried to smother. And in doing so, turning the world into a chorus of echoes, all saying the same thing: he mattered. I wasn't ready to hear it. I might never be. But it was the only thing louder than the guilt. Now, the love I denied, the presence I ignored, it was everywhere. In words, in walls, in whispers. And for the first time, I stopped trying to run. Because it wasn't haunting me anymore. It was asking me to listen. I started writing again, not because I wanted to, but because it felt like the only way to survive. Each sentence spilled from me like blood from an old wound, thick with regret and aching to be seen. But I didn't write fiction. I wrote him, his laugh, his loneliness. The way he used to call late at night, just to ask if I thought the moon looked tired too. I wrote about the night he said he didn't want to wake up the next morning, and how I, exhausted and empty, said, "Then don't." I don't remember my voice being cruel when I said it, but I remember the silence that followed. I remember the weight of it, and now the weight was back. But this time, I carried it in ink. At first, I hid the pages, shoved them in drawers, buried them under clothes. But every time I did, I'd wake up to find one page resting on my pillow, always the same line underlined, as if chosen by unseen hands. He was trying to say goodbye, and you gave him silence. The message was clear. This wasn't confession, it was a reckoning. The story wasn't meant to be hidden. It had lived too long in the dark. Now it needed light. So I printed it. Every page, stapled them together, put it in an envelope, and mailed it to a support group he once mentioned, but never joined. I didn't sign my name. I didn't need to. This wasn't about me anymore. That night, I sat in the hallway, outside my bedroom door, the place where the knocking first started. I sat with my back against the wall, waiting. But there was no knock, no whisper, no shadow crawling beneath the frame. Just silence, the real kind, not the heavy, choking kind. Just stillness. I stayed there for hours, breathing in the quiet, like it was something sacred. And in that moment, I understood something I never had before. Maybe the voice never wanted to torment me. Maybe it was only trying to remind me of what was lost, of what was left undone, and of what I still had the power to share. It wasn't over, of course. The voice still visited, not nightly, not cruelly, just enough to remind me that the grief I carry isn't a punishment. It's a tether, a bond that still breathes, even in the absence. Sometimes I hear his name in the rustle of leaves, or in the static between songs on the radio. Sometimes I feel him in the way silence folds around a room. But now, I don't run. I don't shut my eyes. I whisper back. I say his name, the name I once buried in fear, and I speak it like a prayer, a soft, broken promise that I'll never forget again. And maybe that's what he wanted all along. Not justice, not vengeance, but acknowledgement. The simple, aching truth that he mattered, that someone still remembered the shape of his laugh, the crack in his voice, the way he said, "I'm fine," when he clearly wasn't. I remember now, not because I want to, but because I must. Because forgetting would be the final cruelty, the final betrayal. And I've done enough of that for one lifetime. Now I remember, and I speak. The world hasn't returned to normal. Not really. I still see messages in unexpected places. I still hear strangers say things they shouldn't know. But I don't think it's a haunting anymore. I think it's a thread, a quiet tether between the living and the lost. A reminder that silence can be deadly, and memory can be redemptive. And if I'm lucky, maybe my remembering is helping him move on too. Or maybe, just maybe, he's helping me. So now, when the voice comes, I don't flinch. I listen, and sometimes I speak first. I miss you. I remember. I'm sorry. The knocking is gone, but the echoes remain. Not to terrify, not to punish, just to make sure I never forget again. And I won't. His name lives now, not in whispers, but in the open, not in fear, but in love. And that, finally, is what keeps the door closed. The first time I heard it, I thought it was a glitch. I'd left my phone charging overnight, face down like always, ringer off, nothing unusual. But the next morning, right there in my voice memo app, was a file I didn't create. It had no name, just a timestamp, 3:17 a.m. A weird time. That, the kind of time you ignore in movies because you don't believe in superstitions. I thought maybe I left the app running by mistake. But I hadn't even opened it in days. My thumb hovered over the screen. Then, against all instinct, I pressed play. That's when I heard my voice, unmistakably mine, whispering something I had never said aloud. He begged you not to hang up. The moment it ended, my heart lodged in my throat. That wasn't a memory, that was a secret. And no one could have known. I sat frozen, the phone still in my palm, the air suddenly heavier than it should be. My room was quiet, the kind of dead quiet that makes you feel like you're being watched, not by eyes, but by truths you've tried to bury. I deleted the file instantly, tried to laugh it off as some sleep talk recording or background capture. But deep down, I already knew better. I knew that voice wasn't sleep-deprived mumbling. It was deliberate, intentional, and worst of all, it was right, because I had hung up on someone once. Someone who needed me, someone who called to say goodbye, and I let him go. I told myself I was protecting my peace, told myself he was being dramatic, but the truth is, I didn't want the weight of his pain. I didn't think I could carry it. So I chose silence. And now, silence was choosing me. The next night, I didn't sleep. I watched the time crawl past 3 a.m. with aching eyes and a tightening chest. Nothing happened for a while. Then at 3:17, the screen of my phone flickered to life, even though I hadn't touched it. And there it was, a new voice memo. No title, just a new timestamp. This one started with a faint static, the kind that creeps in before old cassette tapes play. Then came the voice again, my voice cracking softly. You thought leaving him alone would make him stronger. I flinched. My hands were shaking before the words had even finished. I hadn't spoken those thoughts to anyone. They lived in the spaces between my excuses, in the quiet aftermath of every conversation I dodged. I sat there, trembling, wondering what part of me had come back from the dark to haunt the present. And more importantly, why it was speaking now. It didn't stop there. Over the next few days, the recordings continued. Some came during the night, others when I wasn't even home. They weren't just random phrases. They were specific, surgical. They knew exactly where to cut. You didn't call back because it was easier to forget. You thought he cried too often to be taken seriously. You were afraid of what it meant to be needed so desperately. Each sentence carried the weight of confession, but it wasn't coming from someone else. It was from me. These were thoughts I had never dared to put into words, let alone record. Yet there they were, playing back like a ghost, had ransacked my soul and stitched the fragments together into sound. I checked every folder, every setting. I reset the phone, updated the software, even bought a new device. But no matter what I did, the recordings kept appearing. The worst one came on a Sunday afternoon. I was sitting in the kitchen, pretending to do anything but check my phone, when it buzzed. A new memo. I stared at it for nearly 10 minutes before I pressed play. This time, the voice wasn't steady. It was broken, laced with hesitation, and then it said something I had never told a single soul. You felt relief when you found out he was gone. That line cracked something in me I didn't know existed, because it was true, not in the way it sounded, but in a way I had buried so deeply that even I couldn't name it. It wasn't that I wanted him gone. It was that I couldn't bear the constant dread of failing him, the fear of always saying the wrong thing, of not being enough, of watching someone you care about slowly vanish behind glass you can't break. His death gave me a twisted kind of closure, the kind that eats at you later, when the numbness wears off. But then something shifted. One of the recordings came with a new tone. Instead of accusation, there was understanding. My voice said, "You didn't know how to love someone who needed you more than you needed yourself." And for the first time, it didn't feel like a blade. It felt like a key, like something was trying to show me the truth without destroying me. That maybe I hadn't been cruel, maybe I had been scared, maybe I had failed, yes, but not because I was evil, because I didn't know how to help, and I was ashamed of that. I sat with that memo on repeat, letting the words wrap around me like a blanket I didn't deserve but needed. And in that stillness, something inside me cracked, not from pain, but from the possibility that forgiveness might still be available. If not from him, then at least from me. Still, the voice didn't leave. It lingered in my bones, in the corners of rooms, in the pause between waking and sleep. The recordings grew fewer, but they never stopped. Each one felt like another stone lifted from my chest, only to reveal a deeper scar underneath. Some days I wanted it to end. Other days I waited for it, because in the voice I heard something I hadn't heard since the day he died. Honesty, brutal, unflinching honesty. It was a kind of companionship I didn't know I needed. The part of me that I had tried to kill off, returning with its arms open and its eyes full of everything I refused to face. And in a strange way, I started to feel less alone. Haunted, yes, but not abandoned. Because maybe this wasn't a ghost after all. Maybe it was a version of me trying to return. Not the me that ran, but the me that stayed. The one who remembered, the one who still whispered his name when no one else did.
The recordings had become a part of my life. Uninvited, but no longer ignored. I didn't play them out loud anymore. I wore headphones, shut the blinds, locked the door. There was something sacred and shameful about those moments. Something raw. It wasn't just about guilt anymore. It was about exposure. Each word felt like a confession dragged out of my bones. And yet I couldn't stop, because even in the horror of hearing my own thoughts weaponized against me, I felt strangely seen. But last Thursday, something changed. The new memo came in at 3:17 as always, but this time when I played it, I heard a voice that wasn't mine, just one word. Finally. It was whispered so closely into the mic, I could almost feel the breath behind it. It wasn't distorted. It wasn't automated. It was human. Someone else was there. I stopped breathing.
The kind of stop that hurts. My mind sprinted through every possibility. Had someone broken in? Was someone sending these? Was it even possible for someone else to mimic my voice so perfectly? I turned off my phone and pulled the battery, even though I knew it wouldn't help. Whatever this was, it wasn't in the phone. It was using the phone, but its origin was older, deeper. That word, finally, didn't just sound like someone who had been waiting. It sounded like someone who had been listening for years, to me, to everything I'd ever refused to say out loud. And now, for reasons I couldn't understand, it was making itself known. I started thinking about the things I'd never told anyone, not even in passing. Secrets I buried so deep. They didn't just stay hidden from the world, they stayed hidden from me, and somehow the voice was pulling them back into the light, file by file, things I forgot I did, things I wanted to forget, like the time I ignored 3 calls from him in one night, too tired to deal with his spiral. He was fragile, needy. Too many nights ended with me crying after our talks, exhausted from trying to hold him together. I told myself it wasn't my responsibility. I told myself I had a right to step away. And maybe I did. But I never forgave myself for turning off my phone that night. It was the last time he tried to reach me. And now, here I was, years later, being reminded that silence isn't always neutral. It can be deafening. The next recording was longer, almost 7 minutes. I sat through all of it, my body cold, my fingers clenched around the phone, like it might run if I let go. This time, it was a mix of my voice and the other voice overlapping in the worst kind of harmony. My voice would start a sentence. I was afraid if I, and the other would finish it, tried harder, I'd see how much I failed him. Over and over, this duet of shame. And as much as it terrified me, I couldn't stop listening. It was like being haunted by the version of myself I refused to become. Except now, he was the only one telling me the truth. By the end of the recording, the final whisper came, not from me, not from the voice, but from something deeper. There are more truths, and you will remember them all. Then silence. I stopped sleeping, stopped leaving the house, unless I had to. I became obsessed with the timing. 3:17 a.m., always the same. I set alarms, tried to catch the moment before the recordings dropped. Once, I sat staring at the phone app, waiting. Nothing happened. Then, when I blinked for a second, the file appeared. It was as if it waited for me to look away, like it needed me distracted to slip through. That night's message was the worst yet. He died thinking he was a burden, because you made him feel like one. I dropped the phone. I wanted to scream. But what sound could compete with a truth that vicious? What words could defend the undefendable? The voice wasn't tormenting me. It was telling me what I already knew. And the worst part, the absolute worst part, was that part of me was grateful. Grateful to finally hear it out loud. I started talking back. Quietly, at first. What do you want? I asked the darkness. What else is left? I wasn't sure who I was talking to. Myself, the voice, whatever was behind the recordings. Maybe all of them were the same thing. Maybe I had spent years splitting myself into versions. The survivor, the victim, the witness, the coward. Now they were converging, becoming one, and that one was starting to sound like someone I didn't want to meet. But I kept talking, in whispers, in half prayers. I didn't mean to hurt him. I didn't know how to help. I didn't know how to be what he needed. Every night, I said more. And every morning, I woke up to a new file that echoed my own words back, sometimes twisted, sometimes softened, but always accurate. Like it had been waiting for me to admit the truth, so it could reflect it. The most recent file ended with something new. My voice said, "You thought no one knew, but I've always known." And then there was a long pause, but not silence. In the background, I could hear something faint, barely there, a breath, a laugh, a sob. I turned up the volume. It wasn't clear, but whatever it was, it sounded close, closer than before. And that's when it hit me. The voice was drawing nearer. Each message wasn't just a confession, it was a breadcrumb, a trail leading toward something, maybe toward what was left of him. I don't know what happens when the last recording plays, but I think, deep down, I already understand. I'm not being haunted. I'm being followed by the version of myself I never wanted to face. And the knocking wasn't just at my door. It was inside my head, waiting to be answered.
For weeks, the house had been quiet, but not in a peaceful way. It was a hollow quiet, the kind that waits for something to break it. I began to wonder if silence itself had a shape, a weight. It pressed on me, especially at night, around 3:17 a.m., when I found myself not just waiting for the next memo, but expecting it. That was the shift. Somewhere in all of this, the recordings had stopped surprising me. They were part of a new rhythm, a life where regret was scheduled and shame arrived like a clock's chime. The latest file didn't say anything outright. It was just breathing, long, uneven, strained, not mine, not from the same voice that claimed to be me. It felt wrong, like something was mimicking the idea of being alive, like something was trying to remember how to be human. That night, I lay on the floor with my phone on my chest, the memo still playing on loop. I thought maybe if I let the sound vibrate through me, I could understand it better. But all it did was make me feel hollow, like something inside me was listening through my own ears. And that's when I realized this wasn't just about guilt, it was surveillance. Not from a person, but from my own memories. Every thought I had, every image I tried to push away, began resurfacing. The time he left that voicemail crying, and I laughed after deleting it. The time I blocked his number to get some space, even though I knew he was struggling. I had rewritten those moments as self-preservation, but the truth was simpler. I didn't want his pain to leak into my neatly constructed life. And now that pain was leaking anyway, back into my ears, back into my bones, the voice that wasn't mine started using his name. Not just the generic he or him, but his name. The first time I heard it in a recording, I froze. It was like opening a letter from the dead. Just hearing it in my own voice made my skin crawl. You said his name like it was a burden. The words spilled out of the speaker with quiet venom, and it was true. I used to say it like a sigh, like an obligation, like someone I wished had never needed me in the first place. I had loved him once, or something close to it, but love that depends on conditions isn't really love, is it? I loved him when he was manageable, when he smiled through his pain, but when the sadness took over, when it made him irrational, heavy, erratic, I pulled away. And now I was hearing it all over again, in his name, in my voice, like some curse etched into the airwaves. I couldn't trust mirrors anymore. I don't know when it started, but at some point, I began catching glimpses, split-second movements that didn't belong to me. The figure would stand still as I moved, or blink when I hadn't. Once I thought I saw my reflection whisper something before I even opened my mouth. I stared at the mirror for hours that night, phone in hand, waiting to see if the reflection would say more. It didn't. But that same night, the recording came early, 3:11 a.m., and it said, "You were never the only one inside your skin." That sentence sent ice down my spine. What did it mean? Was the voice implying possession? Or was it something worse? Was it suggesting that I had become a vessel for a memory too loud to contain? I tried destroying the phone. I shattered it with a hammer, burned the pieces, and threw them into the river near the old bridge. For a moment, I felt relief. Like maybe, finally, I had unplugged the thing feeding the darkness. But the next morning, my new phone, never connected to the cloud, fresh out of the box, had a memo waiting, same time, same format. And the voice, calm and unshaken, said, "You can break what you hold, but not what holds you." I dropped it, screamed, punched the wall until I bled. But the voice was right. This wasn't about technology. This was about resonance. It was inside me now. Not just the guilt, but the entity that had been feeding on it. My mind was a theater, and I'd given it front row seats to every secret I never said out loud. I started keeping journals, handwritten, because I thought maybe the voice couldn't reach paper. I wrote everything, the memories, the fears, the apologies I never gave. I wrote letters addressed to him. I wrote until my wrist cramped and my vision blurred. And for a few days, the recording stopped. I thought maybe, just maybe, I'd found a loophole, that by turning pain into ink, I could rob the voice of its fuel. But then one morning, I found a piece of notebook paper under my pillow. My own handwriting, my own pen, the sentence I had never written. "You're only safe when you're exposed." The ink was still wet. I checked my desk, my journal. No pages missing, no pens moved. It was as if I had written it in my sleep, or worse, as if the voice had borrowed my hand for the night. The last paragraph of the newest recording didn't sound like me anymore. It was deeper, cracked, like old timber, familiar yet wrong. It said, "He died waiting for you to love him when he was inconvenient. Then and now I wait too." That part shattered something in me, because if this voice was becoming something more than memory, something sentient, then what was it waiting for? An apology, redemption, or something far darker? I don't know anymore if I'm confessing or being warned. I don't know if the knocking I still sometimes hear at 3:17 is coming from outside my door, or from inside the parts of me I buried with him. All I know is this: the voice isn't done, and neither am I. Because, as terrifying as it is, I'm starting to believe I deserve to hear everything it has to say. There's a moment in grief when the memories stop feeling like visits and start feeling like violations. It crept up on me, this sense that my past wasn't just returning, but rearranging itself. The recordings weren't repeating anymore. They were evolving. Each one was a step deeper into something I never wanted to name. They no longer just whispered shame or regret. They narrated emotion, real emotion, but it didn't sound like mine. The inflection, the pauses, the hesitation in the sentences. It was as if someone had recorded the exact moment my guilt turned to self-hatred, and then replayed it with a voice that carried my name but not my soul. Every file was a doorway, and I was the fool who kept walking through. One of them began with a sound I hadn't heard in years, a low, static hum that buzzed at the base of my spine. It wasn't just noise, it was context, because buried in the hum was the faint melody of a song I hadn't heard since the funeral, a song I couldn't listen to without spiraling. But it played clearly beneath the memo, mocking my memory, daring me to relive that day in vivid detail. And then came the voice,
You smiled at his casket, because relief is still a feeling. I dropped my coffee. The mug shattered. My knees followed, because it wasn't just a line. It was a thought I'd buried so deep, I didn't even know it had words. I had felt relief, because it meant I didn't have to carry his sadness anymore, and I hated myself for that. That night, I unplugged everything in the house. Wi-Fi, phone, TV, even the lights. I sat in the dark with only a candle flickering beside me, hoping maybe the silence would be clean again. That maybe if I took everything away, I could find a version of myself untouched by the voice. But even the dark felt watched, and at 3:17, there was no memo, just a knock. Not at the front door, not at the windows, but inside the house. A single deliberate knock. Then another, not frantic, not violent, just patient. It came from the hallway, where the light switch used to hum when he'd sneak to the kitchen late at night. The knocks didn't ask to come in. They reminded me that they already had. And that's when I knew this was no longer about forgiveness. It was about reunion. The next morning I found a voicemail. I hadn't heard the phone ring, but there it was, 3:17 a.m. The message was only 7 seconds long, just breathing. Then a single sentence, my voice warped in exhaustion. What do you do when the only person who can forgive you is the one you failed? I didn't have an answer. Maybe that was the point. Maybe this entire haunting was just an echo, stretching across the years, looking for a reply that would never come. I couldn't decide if I was being punished, or if I was the one who summoned this. After all, I did start listening. I opened the door when I played the first recording. And what if grief, unresolved, festering grief, wasn't just an emotion, but a spirit that needed somewhere to live? Something changed after that. The voice no longer whispered. It spoke, calmly, with intention. It started narrating not just what I'd done, but what I would do. It told me I'd visit the bridge this week, that I'd bring the letters I wrote, and leave them where the river swallowed my old phone, that I'd speak his name out loud, not like a burden, but like a memory I finally wanted to carry. It said I'd kneel in the dirt and cry the way I never let myself cry when he passed. It said I wouldn't run this time, and it was right, because for the first time in years, I wanted to stop hiding. Not because I believed I deserved peace, but because I knew I had become a stranger to myself. And the voice, whatever it was, seemed to know the version of me that I had forgotten how to be. The final recording of the week came not at 3:17, but just after sunset. I was watching the clouds gather when the chime hit. It startled me, not because I wasn't expecting it, but because I wasn't dreading it. I put the phone to my ear and closed my eyes. The message was quiet, no accusation, no venom, just a statement. You were wrong about the moment that broke you. It wasn't the night he died. It was the night you told yourself he should have known better than to need you. I didn't cry right away. I just sat there, listening to the quiet that followed, because there was no voice after that. Just the sound of breath, mine, and the strange peace that came from knowing someone, or something, finally understood the weight I'd carried in silence for so long. That night, I didn't wait for another memo. I didn't sit in dread or wrap myself in guilt. I took out the box of letters I'd written, folded them slowly, and sealed them one by one. I didn't burn them, I didn't tear them. I packed them carefully, like offerings, not to the voice, not to him, but to the part of me that had been waiting all this time to be seen. I still don't know what the knocking truly is. Maybe it's guilt, maybe it's grief, maybe it's just the sound of a soul echoing against its own walls, asking to be heard. But I do know this, it never wanted to hurt me. It only wanted me to listen, and in the silence that followed, I finally did.
I deleted everything. The memos, the voicemails, the cache of recordings stored on drives I swore I never touched. I purged it all in one desperate sweep, my hands trembling, heart pounding, as if I was performing surgery on a part of myself. It felt final. Cleansing. I sat in the dark afterward, breathing like someone who'd finally outrun something they'd never dared to face. But peace, it turns out, is a cruel illusion, especially when it's built on the assumption that erasing a symptom cures the disease. The next night, my phone didn't chime. It buzzed, over and over, dozens of times. Each alert came from an app I didn't recognize, with a name written in symbols and slashes that made no sense. When I opened it, there were no new recordings, just one old file. The first one, the one I deleted. It played by itself. I didn't touch the screen. I listened, frozen, as the familiar voice whispered back into my life. Not pleading anymore, not even angry. Commanding. It was no longer just telling me what I'd done. It was telling me what I'd become. You're no longer the one who hides. You're the one who hears. The tone was colder now. Not cruel but firm, like a teacher with a lesson they were tired of repeating. Then came the sound I hadn't heard in weeks. Knocking, faint, measured, rhythmic. But this time it wasn't in the background of the file. It was real. It echoed through the house, matching the cadence of the voice as it spoke. The knock wasn't asking to come in. It was syncing with my heartbeat. Every part of me realized, all at once, that the knocking was no longer external. It was internal, like something knocking from inside me, waiting for my body to answer. I staggered to the mirror. It had become a strange kind of confessional lately. A place where I saw versions of myself I didn't recognize. And tonight, something was off. My reflection blinked slower, breathed shallower. I tilted my head. It didn't, for a moment. We just stared at each other, and I swore its lips moved, not to mimic me, but to whisper. I couldn't hear the words. I didn't need to. My phone buzzed again. I turned toward it, and when I looked back, my reflection was normal again. Except there was something written across the glass in condensation. He would have lived if you had answered. I don't remember crying. I don't remember screaming. I just remember touching the words, hoping they'd wipe away. They didn't. Stained, they just smeared into a pattern, 3 dots, over and over, like a sentence waiting to finish itself. That night, I heard the knocking again, but it came from beneath me. I live in a single-floor home, no basement, no crawl space, just a foundation of concrete and old tile. But the sound came as clearly as footsteps, slow, heavy pacing in a circle, directly under where I sat. The voice returned, this time without the phone. It was in my head, but not like a thought. Louder, more deliberate. It said, "You've remembered enough, now you obey." That word, obey, rattled through me like thunder in a metal cage. It wasn't asking me to confess anymore. It was asking me to act. I didn't know how or why, but I knew this thing, this presence, was escalating. It was done feeding on regret. Now it wanted proof. Proof that I understood the cost of silence. Proof that I was willing to carry the burden it had been whispering about for weeks. I tried to run, packed a bag, drove aimlessly for hours, until the gas light blinked red. I stopped at a motel in a town I didn't recognize. Cash only, no ID. I thought maybe I'd broken free.
That maybe this presence, whatever it was tied to the house, to the space, to the memories I'd left behind. But when I turned on the motel TV, it flickered to a black screen and played a single recording. My voice, distorted by static, said, "Running is a form of permission." Then the TV died. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw a figure standing in the corner of the room, not moving, not speaking, just watching. I don't know if it mattered. What haunted me more was the thought that even out here, even disconnected from everything, the voice found me. Or maybe I had brought it with me. By the time I returned home, something had changed. The house no longer felt familiar. The layout was the same, but the energy was wrong. Warped, like walking into a place built from memory, but missing key details. The pictures on the walls were faded. The furniture was all slightly askew. Even the scent was off, like old flowers and burned sugar. I knew, deep down, that I hadn't been alone here. Not really. The voice was waiting, and it didn't speak this time. It showed, on my living room wall, projected by something unseen, played a clip me, 3 years ago, on the phone, laughing. The timestamp matched the day of his overdose. I'd always told myself I was asleep, that I didn't hear the call, but this was proof that I was awake. Laughing, ignoring, choosing to delay. The voice had never lied. It had just waited for me to stop lying to myself. And now, I can't pretend anymore. The knocking has grown louder, not just in sound, but in meaning. It knocks when I hesitate. It knocks when I remember. It knocks when I try to forget. And the voice, now a constant thread in my consciousness, has begun assigning tasks. Small ones at first: light a candle, write a sentence, open the door, and do not look out. Each time, I obeyed. Not because I wanted to, but because something deeper than fear, recognition, told me that the more I resisted, the more it would reveal. And I don't know if I can survive what it still knows. Because if the voice is right, if there are still darker secrets I've buried even from myself, then this haunting isn't a punishment, it's a preparation. And the knocking is the countdown. I started to see things, not in the corner of my eye, but in full view. Standing at the kitchen sink, I'd catch a reflection in the faucet that didn't match mine. It would blink when I didn't, move a fraction of a second too slow. Once I stared at it long enough to see its mouth part slightly. It whispered a name I hadn't said in years. Not out loud, not even in thought. That's when I realized the voice wasn't just whispering to me. It was looking through me, pulling out the deepest, most guarded truths I didn't even remember storing. That kind of exposure doesn't just scare you, it dismantles you. I became a man with no private corners, no safe thoughts. The voice knew me better than I did. It walked through my mind like it had built it brick by brick. And the knocking, that was the sound of it, unlocking doors I'd forgotten existed. I started dreaming in memories, not distorted or abstract, literal moment-for-moment replays of things I hadn't thought about in decades. The first fight, the first lie, the first betrayal, all of them. But there was always one difference. I wasn't alone in the memory. The voice was there like a shadow behind the camera. It never interrupted. It just watched, judged. And when I woke up, I didn't feel rested. I felt stripped. Like every night, it took something from me. I'd check my phone each morning, and sure enough, a new file would be waiting. Not audio, video, clips of me sleeping, tossing, whispering names I didn't remember dreaming about. The timestamps always said 3:17 a.m. And in every clip, just before I stirred, there was 1 second of total stillness, then a soft rhythmic knock, like a lullaby meant for the dead. I confronted the reflection. I know how that sounds, but I had no other options. I stood in front of the mirror, hands gripping the sink, and spoke directly to it. I asked what it wanted. I demanded to know how it knew what it knew. For a long time, it was silent. Then the air grew colder, not like a chill, but like something was inhaling heat from the room. The mirror fogged over, and letters began to form, slow, deliberate, backwards. It read, "You buried him inside you. I dug him out." And for the first time since this began, I felt something like respect from the presence. Not pity, not malice, just a kind of grim acknowledgement that I'd finally named what had really died all those years ago, me. Not the version everyone saw, the version I had hidden, buried under layers of survival, denial, and carefully constructed guilt. I thought about telling someone, a friend, a stranger, anyone, but who would believe it, that a voice, born from my own guilt, had turned sentient, that my darkest memories had grown limbs, and now knocked from inside my walls. I even picked up the phone once, dialed the number of someone who used to matter to me, but before it could ring, the screen went black. Not off, black. Then a new memo played, unprompted. It was my voice, flat and hollow. "You don't want help, you want a witness." I dropped the phone. I didn't try again, because deep down, the voice was right. I wasn't reaching out for rescue. I was reaching out so someone else could see what I'd become, so I wouldn't have to face it alone, and the voice wouldn't allow that. It wanted me to be alone, because only in solitude could I hear it clearly. Then came the tasks, not suggestions, not whispers, orders. They started subtly. Rearrange the books in a certain pattern, sleep with the lights on, write apologies to people I hadn't spoken to in years, and burn the pages. But slowly they grew more personal. One night, it told me to dig in the backyard. No explanation, no threat, just the command. Dig where your shadow ends at midnight. I did. I don't know why. Curiosity, dread, desperation, they all felt the same now. I dug until my hands were raw, and there, maybe 3 feet down, I found an old wooden box, one I hadn't seen in years, one I thought I'd thrown out. Inside were items I hadn't remembered keeping. A photo, blood-stained letters, a ring I swore I buried with him, and taped to the lid was a printed message. "You remember more than you admit." That night, the knocking didn't come from the walls or the floors. It came from me, a hollow echo in my chest, a thump that didn't match my heartbeat. It was slow, heavy, intentional, like something was trying to get out. I looked in the mirror again, expecting fog, expecting words. Instead, my own reflection stared back with such intensity, I nearly fell. And then, only for a second, it smiled, not kindly, not cruelly, just knowingly. And I knew then I wasn't just being haunted. I was becoming the haunting. The voice wasn't an intruder. It was an inheritance. A part of me that had waited for years to take control. And now, with every knock, every whispered command, every remembered regret, it was tightening its grip, not to destroy me, to replace me. I don't know what comes next. The voice has gone quiet tonight, but I feel it watching, listening, not just to my thoughts, but to my decisions. It's waiting to see if I'll follow the next order. And I will, because disobedience no longer feels like defiance. It feels like delay. And delay is what killed him. I see that now. I wasn't too late that night. I chose to be late. And now, whatever force is behind this haunting, whether grief, guilt, or something older, wants to make sure I never choose silence again. Even if that means surrendering who I am to become the voice for someone else. The knocking continues. Not louder, just closer.
I stopped hearing the knocking for 3 days. The silence was deafening. It didn't feel like peace. It felt like the moment right before a scream. Every object in my home seemed to vibrate with a tension I couldn't name. Like the furniture knew something I didn't. Like the light bulbs were holding their breath. The house hadn't felt this quiet since before the voice came. It wasn't relief. It was a pause, the kind of pause that comes before a shift, a change, a decision. And sure enough, on the 4th night, the voice returned, not as a whisper, as a breath, low and drawn out, spoken directly into my ear like it had crept beside me while I slept. "You can't run from what lives in your bones," it said. "And then you let him die. You keep letting him die." That sentence didn't fade like the others. It lingered in my mind, like a taste you can't wash away. It followed me into the bathroom, into the hallway, even outside where I hoped the open sky might feel freeing again. It didn't. The air felt too tight, like the world had shrunk around me. Everywhere I went, I saw signs, posters, text messages, old receipts, with his name scribbled over mine. Every conversation I overheard, whether in a grocery store or on the sidewalk, always circled back to loss, guilt, or silence. It was like the universe was staging a performance just for me. Or maybe the voice had taken control of more than just my house. Maybe it was leaking into reality, distorting the world until I had no choice but to admit that the haunting wasn't around me anymore. It was through me. I began to forget things, simple things. What I wore yesterday, what I ate for dinner, whether or not I locked the front door. At first I thought it was stress, lack of sleep, paranoia. But then I noticed I was forgetting things I wanted to remember. The sound of his voice, the smell of that night. The final text I never opened. I reached for them like someone reaching through fog, and they weren't there. Like someone had come in during the night and wiped them from my mind. The voice whispered one night, "You can't keep both, memory or guilt. Choose." And I did. Without realizing it, I clung to guilt, because it was the only thing that felt real anymore. The only thing untouched by the voice's erasure. Guilt became my anchor, and the more I held on to it, the louder the knocking returned. Not just in the house, but in my chest, my ears, my mind. I started recording myself while I slept, not because I wanted evidence, but because I needed to know what was happening when my mind wasn't mine. What I found chilled me more than any whisper ever could. On the first night, the audio captured 6 hours of steady breathing, normal. Then at 3:17 a.m., the second voice entered the frame, deeper, rasping, but still mine. It repeated a phrase over and over. "I am not the one who stayed. I am the one who watched." The second night, the same, different words. If he screamed, I didn't hear it. By the third night, there was movement. A scraping sound, like a chair dragged slowly across wood. But I have no chairs in the bedroom, only the bed. And on the 4th night, silence. Until the end of the recording, a final whisper, "You can't keep pretending I'm not you." I used to wonder if I was losing my mind. Now I wonder if I ever had full possession of it. The voice doesn't ask questions anymore. It issues statements.
It doesn't knock on doors. It walks through them, and somewhere along the line, I stopped resisting, not out of surrender, but because something inside me wants to see how far this will go. Maybe that's the horror of it. Not the fear, not the regret, but the curiosity, the pull, the way the voice has become so familiar. It no longer sounds foreign. It feels like I've been speaking to myself this whole time, and only now am I beginning to listen. And if that's true, if this has always been a part of me, then maybe what I called haunting was just revelation. An unveiling, the truth, spoken in a voice I couldn't ignore. I've started responding to it, not in words, in actions. When it says don't answer the phone, I don't. When it says erase your name from the mailbox, I do. When it tells me to write things I don't remember thinking, I write them. And each time the pressure in my chest lessens. The knocking doesn't go away, but it becomes rhythmic, soothing, like a metronome, guiding me into alignment. I know this sounds like madness. I know if anyone else heard this, they'd say I needed help. But help implies that there's something left to save, and I don't know if that's true anymore. The man who kept secrets, who avoided pain, who buried guilt under years of silence, he's been peeled away, layer by layer. What's left is something else, something that listens, something that obeys. Tonight I looked in the mirror again. I expected to see myself. I didn't. The reflection was darker, hollow-eyed, smiling, and it spoke without sound. I don't know how to explain it, but I understood it perfectly. You were the secret. Now you're the voice. I stood there for a long time, watching this version of me, this culmination of all the things I never wanted to face. And instead of fear, I felt recognition and acceptance. Because maybe this isn't a punishment. Maybe this is evolution, a becoming. And if that's true, then what comes next isn't possession, it's transformation. The knocking hasn't stopped, but now I open the door before it hits 3 times.
It's hard to describe what it feels like to live without a boundary between yourself and the thing haunting you. The line that once separated me from it is gone, and not because I surrendered, but because I realized it was never standing outside the door. It didn't have to knock. It just waited for me to listen. Now, there's no start or stop to the whispering. It moves with me, through my breath, my thoughts, my actions. Some nights, I wonder if I was ever truly alone. If the silence I once lived in was simply the quiet before the thing in me matured. If the knocks weren't warnings, but a kind of invitation. And I was the one who finally opened the door, not with keys, but with remorse. I tried to delete the files again. The recordings, the photos, the written notes. I sat at my desk and went through every folder, every backup drive, dragging them all to the trash and hitting delete like it might erase something deeper than data. But the computer didn't respond. The screen didn't freeze. It turned black. And for a moment, my own reflection stared back at me from the glass. But it wasn't blinking. It wasn't breathing. The monitor lit up again, and a single message appeared. Stop pretending you don't remember. The cursor blinked after the sentence, as if daring me to reply. But I didn't. I couldn't, because it was right. I do remember all of it. I remember the screen I ignored, the hand I didn't reach for, the message I read and left unanswered because I didn't want to feel it. The knocking hasn't stopped, but it's no longer coming from the walls. It follows me now, soft, deliberate knocks,
that echo in my ears, even when I'm walking down a crowded street. Sometimes 3, sometimes 4. Once it knocked 5 times, slow, heavy, and final. That was the night I dreamt of his face again. Not the way I remember it, but the way it must have looked, the moment he realized I wasn't coming. I woke up gasping, not from fear, but from shame so thick it felt like I was drowning. The knock that followed wasn't loud. It was gentle, like a tap on the shoulder from someone trying to say, "Now you understand." And I did. It wasn't punishing me. It was making sure I never forgot again. The pain wasn't the torment. It was the lesson. I began writing again, but not fiction, not stories, confessions, pages and pages of memories I had long buried, now resurfacing with exact details, the kind you can't fabricate. Dates, names, smells, the cadence of his laugh, the way the air smelled that last winter, the way I waited just a little too long to say something kind. I write because the voice won't let me stop. It whispers as I move the pen, sometimes guiding my hand into words I don't realize I'm forming until they're already written. And at the end of each page, a signature appears, his. I don't write it. I don't know how it gets there, but it's always the same, careful, quiet, and full of the kind of peace I never gave him. One morning, I found a box at my door. No delivery slip, no return address. Inside was a cassette tape, a small player, and a sticky note that read, "Press play when you're ready to remember everything." I waited 3 days. On the 4th, I gave in. I pressed play. The tape crackled at first, static and silence. Then my own voice filled the room. Not like a recording, like a confession. I was younger in the voice, more sure of myself, more guarded, and yet the words were raw. I saw the message. I knew what he meant. I didn't go because I didn't want to be needed. I didn't want to see him fall apart and feel like I had to fix it. I didn't go, and I told myself that was mercy. The tape ended with no clicks, just silence. But it was the kind that stays inside you. I don't know what I'm becoming, but it's not the man I was. That man lived in denial, holding a door shut with both hands, while the past begged to be acknowledged. This version of me doesn't run from the knocks anymore. He opens them, he listens, he learns, and he remembers. Every time the voice rises now, it doesn't fill me with dread. It fills me with purpose, because I know what it wants, and I know what I owe. I thought the haunting would end if I admitted what I did, but it doesn't, because it was never about admitting. It was about becoming the memory I denied, and now that memory walks with me. It whispers for others. It knocks on their walls too, and one day they'll listen, just like I did. So I've stopped deleting. I've stopped running. I've stopped calling it, because the truth is, the knocker isn't a ghost or a demon. It's the part of us that remembers what we tried to forget. The part that refuses to stay buried. The part that knows the things we swore never to say aloud, and whispers them anyway. It never wanted to destroy me. It wanted to show me what I truly was. A keeper of silence. A curator of guilt. A man who let someone fall because he didn't want to carry the weight. And now that I've remembered, now that I've listened, it speaks through me. It is me. And tonight, for the first time, I knock. The voice said a name I had never spoken aloud. Not even once. Not in childhood. Not in grief. Not in confession. It was the kind of name that lived in the bottom layer of my memory, sealed shut under shame and dust. A name I had never dared give form to, because if I did, I feared I'd have to explain what happened, or worse, why I let it happen. And yet, there it was, whispered in the dark, like a thread unraveling from the corner of my mind. I was lying still when it happened, the kind of stillness that comes only when your heart knows something is about to shift. The voice didn't shout. It didn't echo. It breathed the name into the space between my ears, precise, deliberate, and undeniable. And the moment I heard it, my throat closed around itself. I got up from the bed, like I was moving through water. The weight of that name clung to me, heavy and damp, pulling my limbs downward with every step. I walked to the bathroom mirror, not expecting an answer, but needing to see something, anything, that proved I was still tethered to reality. My reflection was there, mostly, but something about it felt misaligned, like the face staring back was rehearsing a truth I hadn't caught up to. The name still rang in my head, softer now, as if it had passed through me, but wasn't done with me. It wasn't just a sound, it was a question, a beckoning, and even though I hadn't said it in years, the voice had, and now it was mine again, whether I wanted it or not. I made the mistake of looking it up, just the name, nothing else. But my search bar filled in the rest for me. The autofill didn't feel like an algorithm. It felt like a memory completing itself. Articles, a photo, a headline I had once avoided, like it could burn my eyes. Teen boy found after 3 days, alone, silent, no explanation. The face on the screen hit me like ice, because I knew it. Not just in the way a stranger recognizes someone from a distance, but in the way a secret recognizes its owner. My breath stopped, not because I didn't expect to see him, but because I'd hoped I wouldn't. I thought the silence I'd maintained would be enough to keep this part of me buried. But clearly the voice had other plans. I hadn't seen that boy since I was 17. The forest we wandered into was supposed to be a game. Just two scared kids playing adult games with shadows and stories. He trusted me. He asked if we should go back when it got dark. I told him no, that we were close to something exciting. I told him the night would protect us if we respected it. And then I left, not out of cruelty, out of fear of what being found with him might mean. Fear of questions, of judgment, of what people might assume if they saw us together at that hour. So I walked away, told myself he'd find his way out, told myself I'd circle back. I never did, and when they found him, he said nothing, not about me, not about the forest, not about the 3 days. The voice waited a long time before mentioning him. It let me build a whole world around my denial, let me become someone else, someone safe. But now I understand. The knocking wasn't random. The whispers weren't trying to hurt me. They were guiding me, slowly, precisely, painfully, back to this boy, back to that moment. The real haunting wasn't the sound at the door. It was the silence in my memory, the silence I constructed to avoid being the villain. But I was, not by action, by abandonment. And now the voice had spoken his name, because it knew I was finally weak enough to remember, and strong enough to face it. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I sat on the edge of the bed, gripping the edge of my phone like it could tether me to the present. I typed his name again, over and over, and every time the same articles appeared. No update, no follow-up, just that single snapshot in time, his blank eyes, his mouth closed, his name beneath the headline, like an accusation carved into stone. And I thought about how easy it was for me to move on, to pretend it hadn't mattered, to explain it away as youth, fear, bad luck. But none of those excuses could quiet the voice now, because it had already claimed me, not as a victim, but as a keeper of the truth, of the silence, of the choice I made to walk away. And then, just before dawn, the knock came again. But this time, it wasn't on the door. It came from the inside of my wardrobe. 3 soft taps, deliberate, spaced evenly, as if something inside waited patiently, knowing I would come. I didn't move. I didn't need to. The voice followed. It whispered the name again. Only this time, it sounded like him, like the boy I left behind. And that was the first time I cried, not out of fear, but out of grief, because I realized, in that moment, that he never truly left that forest, and neither did I.
The morning after the knock from the wardrobe, I stayed in bed longer than usual, not because I was tired, but because I couldn't bring myself to stand up and walk past it. The door was open, not wide, but just enough to suggest something had come out, or had never truly been inside to begin with. That crack in the frame became the only thing I could focus on. My thoughts moved in circles. Had I opened it? Was it always like that? Did the knock come from within, or just behind it? But I already knew the answer. I had heard it with my own ears. The knock wasn't metaphor anymore. It had moved in, and worse, it was now using his voice. I didn't tell anyone. How could I? I had no photos, no proof, and more importantly, no version of the story that didn't make me the cause of it all. There's something profoundly isolating about hearing a voice that knows your secret. A voice that doesn't ask you questions, but reminds you of what you tried to forget. It didn't want an apology. It didn't even want justice. It wanted acknowledgement. And that kind of reckoning doesn't come with peace. It comes with slow, cold truth. I went about my day with robotic precision, made coffee, sat at the desk, scrolled without absorbing anything. But in the background of every task, I could feel something watching, waiting, breathing. I kept the wardrobe door closed that night, not because I thought it would stop anything, but because I needed the illusion of control. But illusions don't last long in this kind of story. The first knock came at 2:17 a.m. Not from the door, from the floorboards beneath my bed. One knock, then silence, and then a voice, his voice, so close, I swore it came from the space between the mattress and the floor. I waited. I froze. My breath caught in my throat, not from fear but from guilt, so dense it pressed down on my lungs like a weight. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just listened, because that's what it wanted. That's all he'd ever wanted too. When I finally moved, I dropped to my knees and peered under the bed. Empty, clean, still. But I stayed there for minutes, maybe hours, just staring into the space where the voice had come from. I whispered his name once, just to see what would happen. Nothing. Not immediately. But when I sat back on the bed, the closet door creaked open again, on its own. No wind, no draft, just the sound of an invitation being extended. This wasn't about punishment anymore. It was about confrontation, and confrontation doesn't care whether you're ready or not. It just arrives, like dusk, like decay, like a voice inside your own. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I turned on the cassette recorder I hadn't touched in years, sat on the floor, and hit record. I began speaking slowly, softly, like I was addressing a room filled with memories that had grown teeth.
I said his name. I admitted where I'd left him. Why I left. What I told myself to make the guilt easier. I told the full story, not to exonerate myself, but to give shape to the shadows that had started following me. The tape spun endlessly, capturing words I never planned to say aloud. And when I stopped recording, the room felt quieter. Not peaceful, but hollow, as if something had stepped out for a moment to consider what I'd just confessed. But the peace didn't last. Around 4 a.m., the whispering returned. This time, not a voice, not a knock, but a song, a faint hum, childlike in its rhythm, rising from the walls themselves. It wasn't a melody I recognized, but I knew it. It was the tune we hummed as kids, while daring each other to walk deeper into the woods. A childish thing, now laced with something older, something patient. The walls pulsed with it. The closet door swayed slightly with every note, like a metronome to my regret. And then I understood. The voice wasn't just him. It was our moment, that frozen hour in the forest, that decision to leave, that ache I'd buried under years of silence. And now it was singing back to me. And just before sunrise, the song stopped. Silence returned, but not the comforting kind. This silence had depth. It had eyes. It had memory. I stood in the center of the room, surrounded by it, and I whispered the words I had never said. I'm sorry, not to make it end, but to make it real. I waited. Nothing moved. The air didn't shift, but the sense of being watched faded, just slightly, like something had heard me, like the knock had finally been answered. But I knew better than to believe it was over. This wasn't forgiveness, it was only the beginning, and the closet door was still open. I tried to avoid the closet the next morning, tried not to look at it, not to think about it, not to let it shape the rhythm of my breathing. But you can't ignore a door that opens itself. You can't walk past it without knowing, without wondering. It was no longer just a place to store coats and things I didn't need. It had become a wound in the wall. A mouth, maybe. A memory shaped like a gap. And the problem with wounds is they don't heal just because you look away. I stood at the edge of the room for over an hour, staring at the half-open sliver between the door and the frame, hoping it wouldn't move again, terrified that it would. I left the apartment before noon, walked for hours with no destination, just the constant need to stay in motion. But even as my body moved, my mind kept circling back to the knock, the name, the voice, the silence after the apology. I kept asking myself, what does it want now? Because it didn't feel finished. That kind of presence doesn't knock, unless it has more to say. And it certainly doesn't whisper your darkest secret just to leave you alone afterward. I ended up at a small bookstore near the edge of town, one I hadn't visited in years. Something about old paper and dusty corners felt safer than being at home. I searched the shelves, not for books, but for some version of the past I hadn't yet unpacked. I found an old yearbook, the kind sold for $1 in a crate near the back. It wasn't from my school, not even my city, but I flipped through it anyway. Page after page of unfamiliar faces, smiling blankly at a time they assumed would define them. Then I stopped. Page 48. There he was. The boy, not my yearbook, not my class, but there he was, just a different version of him. Same eyes, same subtle sadness in the smile. Different name. A name I didn't recognize. I stared at it like it might rewrite everything I knew, but it didn't. It just confirmed what I feared. He was everywhere, or at least the memory of him was spreading subtly, quietly, like water leaking through the seams of a forgotten house. I brought the yearbook home with me, sat with it in my lap for hours, flipping to that page and back again. And the more I looked at his face, the more I started hearing it again. The faint hum, the same melody from the walls the night before. But this time, it came from the hallway, and with it, a knock. Not at the door, not at the closet, but at the mirror. 3 soft raps, as if someone inside the glass wanted to be let out. I turned to face it. My reflection was there, but only mine, until it blinked. Not me, him. Just for a second, just long enough for me to understand what he wanted. That night, I finally stepped into the closet. I left the lights off, sat cross-legged inside, surrounded by the hanging coats and muffled walls, and waited. I whispered again, "I'm sorry." The air shifted, the walls seemed to breathe, and then the voice returned, low, pained, almost tired. "You told them you never saw me." I shut my eyes. The words stabbed sharper than any scream, because they were true. When the police asked, I said I hadn't seen him that night, said we hadn't spoken, said I barely knew him. All of it, a lie. A lie I told to save myself, and the voice knew it. Knew that my silence let them believe he got lost on his own, that it wasn't my fault. But it was. I whispered the truth into the dark. Every detail, the dare to go deeper into the forest, the laughter that turned to panic, the point where I left him, my fear, my lies, my rehearsed innocence. I said it all. I thought the voice might scream, thought it might claw at me, but it didn't. It just listened. And when I was done, it said nothing. No reply, no breath, just the return of that humming sound. Low, steady, soft, a lullaby, almost. And then silence, as if something had finally been put to rest. I stayed there until morning, not because I was trapped, but because I couldn't bring myself to leave. And when I finally opened the closet door, light poured in, not just from the room, but from somewhere deeper. A warmth I didn't recognize. I looked around. No shadows, no knocks, no voice, just stillness. And for the first time, it didn't feel like a warning. It felt like permission, like something inside the house had accepted the truth I'd buried for so long, but I knew better than to trust it completely. Peace, when it comes from the dead, is never final. It's rented, temporary, and somewhere beneath the floorboards or behind the mirror, the truth is still breathing, still watching, still waiting for whatever comes next. I didn't speak for the rest of that day, not to anyone, not even to myself. The apartment was still, the way a forest is after it's been burned down, quiet, not because there's peace, but because there's nothing left to scream. I avoided mirrors. I left the closet open. I didn't make the bed. I moved slowly, like I was learning how to exist again, without the weight of a lie pressing on my spine. But the truth doesn't free you. Not really. It rearranges the prison. It takes the shape of your face and follows you from room to room. I thought confession would end the knocking, but it didn't. It just changed where it came from. That night, it came from the front door again. A single polite knock. 3 soft raps. But something was different. It wasn't angry. It wasn't insistent. It was curious. I stood across the room and watched the door as if it might speak. It didn't open. It didn't shake. But I felt it, that presence again. Not just outside the door, but inside me. In my breath, my chest, the spaces between my ribs. I stepped forward and whispered the name I'd buried for years. Just once. The door didn't answer, but the hallway light flickered. And then the voice returned, clearer than ever before. "You remember it wrong. I staggered back. My memories were vivid. I'd spent years carrying them like sharp stones in my pocket. But now I wasn't sure they were mine, or if they had always been rearranged. The forest, the panic, the moment I left him behind. I saw it clearly every night. But the voice said I was wrong, that I'd told myself a version that kept me from looking too close. The silence I'd offered wasn't just about protecting myself from blame. It was about hiding from the possibility that I didn't just leave him. I might have led him there, that the game was never his idea, that the woods weren't his fear, that I didn't just watch him vanish, but walked away while he screamed. I couldn't trust my memory anymore. That night, I went digging, boxes in the attic, old notebooks, forgotten photographs. I found one, creased, slightly burned around the edge. Us in the woods. I was smiling. He wasn't. He looked worried. I'd never seen this photo before, but there it was, proof of a moment I didn't remember, or refused to. And then I found something else. A tape, an old voice recorder I hadn't used since high school. I didn't recall what was on it.
See ya.
But when I hit play, I heard our voices, clear, sharp, real, and the laughter I thought we shared. It was only mine. His voice cracked, scared, telling me to stop, telling me to turn back. And mine calm, cold, cruel, telling him to keep going. My stomach twisted as I listened to it over and over again. The knocking returned, this time from the ceiling, then the floor, then the closet again. The sound was no longer asking to be let in. It was all around me, like something had finally filled the entire apartment, taking the shape of everything I'd touched. The air grew colder, the lights dimmed, and I heard the voice again, now closer than ever. Not whispering, speaking. You buried the truth, but I never left. I fell to my knees, clutching the tape recorder. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just let the words settle into my bones.
See ya.
Because for the first time, I wasn't fighting them. I was remembering them. The knock stopped, just before sunrise. The air shifted, and for a moment, I felt him standing behind me. Not angry, not vengeful, just waiting. Waiting for me to say the one thing I'd never said. Not to the police, not to his parents, not even to myself. So I said it. Softly, bitterly. It was my fault. I didn't just leave you. I sent you there, and I never came back. And in that silence, something unlatched. I didn't hear a reply. I didn't feel a presence leave. But I knew the truth had been heard. And the house, the one that had groaned, knocked, whispered, and haunted, finally went still. The quiet wasn't hollow anymore. It was heavy, honest. I walked out of the closet, closed the door behind me, and for the first time, it stayed shut. No whispers, no creaks, just silence. I sat at the window, watching the sun rise. It didn't feel redemptive. It didn't feel clean, but it was real. And sometimes, that's all you can hope for. The knocking had taken everything I thought I was, and peeled it back, one memory at a time. And now, there was nothing left to hide, nothing left to fear, except the life I had to live beyond the door. The silence wasn't peace, it was accountability. And whether he had forgiven me or not, no longer mattered, because I had heard the truth, spoken it, and there was no going back. I thought silence meant it was over, that I had spoken the truth, opened the door to the past, and in doing so, closed the door to the haunting. But grief doesn't work like that. Guilt doesn't vanish. Because you've said you're sorry, it lingers. It settles into the corners of your mind, like dust that won't blow away no matter how wide you open the windows. And even though the knocking had stopped, the weight remained. Heaviness beneath my skin. A stillness in the air that felt loaded, like a breath being held. And the night it began again. It didn't start with a sound. It started with a feeling. The feeling that I wasn't alone in the room. Even though the door was locked, the lights were off, and everything was still. It was nearly 2 a.m. I had just drifted into a shallow sleep when I woke with a jolt. No noise, no dream, just an awareness. Like something had stepped into the room the moment I crossed into unconsciousness. I kept my eyes shut at first, trying to dismiss the feeling, but there was pressure on the mattress. A shift, subtle but real, as if the bed had dipped slightly under a weight that hadn't been there seconds before. I opened my eyes. The room was still. No movement, no shadow, but I didn't look under the bed. Not at first. I lay there frozen, telling myself it was nothing. Maybe a draft, maybe my body playing tricks on me, until I heard the breath. Not mine, not above me, beneath. I didn't move. I couldn't. The sound was faint, like someone trying to breathe quietly, but it was close. In the silence it became louder than anything I'd heard before. I stared at the ceiling, every nerve in my body tightening with the certainty that something was there. Not outside the room, underneath me, a presence I couldn't see but could feel, could hear. It was patient. That was the most terrifying part. It wasn't trying to scare me. It was simply waiting. And in that stillness, I realized something even more terrifying. The voice I'd heard in the closet, the name it whispered, the knocking at the mirror, none of it had ever come from the walls. It had always come from under the bed. I slowly shifted, barely breathing, inching toward the edge to peer over. My heart thundered. Every instinct told me not to. But I had to know. I had to see. I leaned just far enough to glimpse the darkness beneath, and saw nothing, just black space. But the breath grew louder, closer, and then a voice, not a whisper this time, a low murmur, raspy and strange. You let it in. I flinched, rolled back onto my back, covered my face with my hands. But it wasn't fear that twisted my stomach this time. It was recognition. That voice, it wasn't his. It was something else. Something older. Something that had been following my lie for years, feeding on it, growing in the silence I left behind. I stayed like that until the sun broke through the window, painting lines across the room. I didn't sleep. I didn't move. And when I finally stood, my legs shook. I looked under the bed again. Nothing, just emptiness, as if it had never been there at all. But I knew better now. Some things don't live in physical spaces. They live in the spaces between memories, between confessions. I walked around the apartment like I was learning it again, checking every door, every mirror, every shadow. And though I saw nothing, I felt it. The presence had moved. It no longer needed the closet, or the walls, or the knocking, to speak to me. It had found its way in, and now it lived inside the quiet. That day, I didn't go to work, didn't leave the apartment. I sat in the middle of the living room floor, tape recorder beside me, the photo still folded in my hand. I replayed the audio of our voices, over and over, not to punish myself, though I deserved it, but to remember every detail I had tried to forget, because something had shifted. The haunting wasn't about him anymore. It wasn't about the boy I'd left in the woods. He had come, he had spoken, he had been heard. But the thing I'd invited in by lying, by burying the truth that had never left, it had simply waited for the truth to be spoken so it could finally emerge. That night, I didn't sleep in the bedroom. I couldn't. The space under the bed was too quiet, too calm. I slept on the couch, with every light on, the windows locked, the closet shut. But even there, I heard it. Just once, a slow whisper, right in my ear. Not angry, not mournful, just a question. What else haven't you told? And I realized, confession is not the end. It's the beginning. Because once you admit to one lie, every other silence comes clawing back, hungry for light. And whatever was under the bed knew that it wasn't done with me. Not yet. I tried to tell myself the whisper wasn't real, that my exhaustion had reached a point where hallucinations were possible, that the trauma, the confession, the endless nights of knocking had frayed the edges of my mind. But something about that voice, that question, clung to me. What else haven't you told? It was a small thing, a whisper, but it felt heavier than anything the knocking had ever brought. Because it didn't ask what happened. It asked what I hid, and that was different. That was deeper. Because even after I told the truth about what happened in the woods, I hadn't told everything. Not really. There was another silence, another secret I had locked in a different kind of closet. One I didn't even dare look into. Until now. The day passed like a ghost. I moved through the hours without purpose, each minute pressing on my shoulders, like something watching, waiting. I didn't eat, couldn't. My body felt foreign, like something borrowed. When the sun began to fall and shadows stretched across the apartment, I stood in the hallway and stared at the door to the second room, the one I never used. The door was always shut, though I'd never had a reason why. It wasn't a guest room. It wasn't an office. It was just a space I avoided. Not out of fear, but out of instinct. Like something in me knew not to open it. Like I'd made a deal long ago with whatever lived inside. And keeping that door closed was part of the agreement. But that whisper, that question, it had broken the rules. It had reminded me that the things we bury don't stay dead. They wait. They wait in rooms we never enter, in drawers we never open, in thoughts we never finish. I stepped forward, hand trembling, as it hovered over the doorknob. For a moment I imagined hearing a knock on the other side, but none came. Just silence. A heavy, waiting silence. I turned the knob slowly and pushed it open. The door didn't creak. It didn't resist. It opened like it had been waiting for me. Inside, the room was dark, the air dry and still, the faint scent of paper and wood floating in the air like an old breath. The walls were bare, the window sealed shut. A small desk sat in the corner, covered in dust, as though it hadn't been touched in years, and yet everything felt placed. Intentional, like a memory reconstructed. I walked in, my footsteps soft on the worn floorboards. The desk drawer stuck at first, but I forced it open. Inside were old journals, ones I didn't remember writing, but recognized all the same. Pages filled with scribbled thoughts, restless entries, notes I'd never meant anyone to see. My hand shook as I flipped through them. Names, places, events. Then I saw it. Her name, written over and over, each time smaller, more desperate. I didn't know why I had written it so many times. I didn't remember needing to. She was from before the boy in the woods, before the knocking, She was the first person I'd shut out, the first silence I kept. I had loved her, or thought I had. But something happened, something I'd never said aloud. I still don't know why. One day she stopped answering. One day she disappeared. And I never told anyone how we fought before that. How I screamed. How I said things I shouldn't have. How I told her I hoped I'd never see her again. And then, I didn't. She was just gone. And I'd told myself it was coincidence. That I hadn't meant it. That words didn't matter. But I wrote her name, again and again, in the dark, when no one could see. Because part of me did wonder if it was my fault. If I had spoken her into silence. Suddenly, the air in the room shifted. I wasn't alone. The temperature dropped, not like a breeze, but like the room decided to grow cold. The silence deepened, and from beneath the desk, I heard a breath, short, stuttering, afraid. I dropped the journal and backed away. The shadows stretched longer than they should have. And then, a voice, not the whisper from the closet, not the one from under the bed, but something softer, younger. It spoke her name, just once, and then, you never looked for me. My knees buckled. I hadn't searched. I hadn't called. I had pretended I didn't care. Because it was easier. Stand. Because if I didn't care, then I didn't have to hurt. The knock came then, from under the floor. Not on the door. Not on the wall. From beneath the room itself. And suddenly, I understood. It had never been one ghost. Never one voice. The knocking had always come from multiple places, because there were multiple silences. I had buried not just one truth, but many, and each one had taken root in a different corner of my life. Each one waited for its own moment to be heard. The truth about the boy, the truth about the girl, the truths I didn't even know I'd silenced until something came and whispered them back. And now they were awake, and they weren't asking for forgiveness. They were asking for acknowledgement. I closed the drawer, backed out of the room, shut the door gently, but the knocking followed me. Not on the walls, not in the hallway, in my chest. It beat against my ribs, like fists demanding to be let out. The truth is not one weight. It is many. And when you begin to lift it, you have to carry every piece. That night, I didn't sleep. I didn't try. I sat on the couch again, lights off, listening to the silence. And in it, I heard all the things I never said, layered, tangled, relentless. Each one, its own knock. Each one, its own voice. Each one, a ghost I had made. It started again the next night, but differently. There was no knock, no whisper, no sudden chill that made the air feel like breath from another world. Just stillness. A suffocating kind of stillness. The kind that makes you feel like you're not just alone in a room. You're trapped in it. Trapped with something that refuses to make itself known. I had left the second room untouched since hearing her voice. I didn't dare go back inside, but the silence in the apartment had grown sharper, more aware, like a mirror that remembers your reflection after you walk away. I began to realize the knocking was not the haunting, it was the warning. And now that it had stopped, I had no way of knowing what was coming next. I had no way to prepare for the third name. I was sitting at the kitchen table when I remembered him. Not the boy in the woods, not the girl who vanished. This one was different. I hadn't spoken his name in years, not even to myself. It wasn't guilt that buried him. It was fear. Fear of what would happen if I let the memory breathe. Fear that speaking, it would unravel everything I'd built to survive. He had been a part of my life at a time when I was pretending to be someone else. Someone I could survive being, but he saw through it. That was the problem. He saw me. He saw the damage I didn't know how to name. And when he tried to bring it out of me, I didn't thank him. I destroyed him. It wasn't loud. It wasn't violent. It was worse. I cut him out without a word. I let him care, let him hope, let him offer me a kind of love I didn't believe I deserved. And then I left, without explanation, without closure. I told myself he was better off without me, that I was poison, that cutting him out was kindness. But that's a lie cowards tell themselves when they don't have the courage to face the damage they leave behind. And that night, the damage came back. It didn't knock. It didn't whisper. It stood in the hallway, its shape barely visible in the dim light from the kitchen. A figure that didn't move, didn't breathe, just watched. I didn't speak. I didn't ask who it was. I already knew. My voice broke when I said his name out loud. For the first time in years, I said it again, softer, like maybe if I said it gently enough, he'd forgive me. But he didn't move. He just stood there, a shadow that wasn't a shadow. And then he stepped backward, not forward, not toward me, back, into the dark, into nothing, and vanished. It was then I realized something else. The knocking had always followed a pattern. Every silence, every hidden truth. Once it had been remembered, the knocking moved from the door to the mirror, to the closet, to under the bed, to under the floor, and now to the hallway. It wasn't random. It was mapping me, room by room, lie by lie, until every part of this apartment, every corner of my life, had been touched by truth. I stayed up that night, walking from room to room, whispering names, speaking to the people I had hurt, to the ghosts I had made, not for closure, but to stop hiding, to stop pretending I didn't remember. But even as I spoke, even as I owned it, I could feel something building, not anger, not forgiveness, something colder. Like the truth had stopped waiting to be revealed and had started preparing for something else. Because once every silence is broken, once every lie has a voice, there's nothing left to hold it back. The knocking was never about them. It was about what follows. When the sun rose, I found something beneath the doormat. A note, folded carefully. Childish handwriting, uneven and shaky. It read, "You remembered them, but what about me?" My stomach sank. It wasn't over. There was one more, one final silence. The deepest one, the one I had buried so far down. I'd forgotten it existed. It wasn't about someone else. It was about me, the thing I'd never said aloud. Not to a person, not to myself. The thing I refused to even think in complete sentences. And whatever had been knocking, whatever had whispered, it had been leading me here, preparing me to face not the people I had hurt, but the person I had become, the one I still couldn't admit I was. That night, I didn't turn on the lights. I didn't lock the doors. I sat in the middle of the floor in the dark, and I waited, not for a knock, not for a whisper, for the sound of my own voice finally saying the thing I had always been afraid to hear. I didn't know what the words would be until they came out, but once they did, I knew they were the ones I had feared most, the ones I thought would destroy me. But when I spoke them, the apartment didn't shake, the shadows didn't rise. I just cried. Because even though it didn't stop the presence, even though I still felt it watching me, I wasn't hiding anymore. And sometimes, the scariest thing isn't what's in the dark. It's who you are when the light finally hits. It came back one last time, but it didn't knock on the door. It didn't whisper through the closet. It didn't crawl from under the bed or call from the floorboards. This time, it stood right behind me. I didn't hear it arrive. I didn't feel the temperature shift. I just knew it was there, because suddenly, I couldn't breathe. Not from fear, but from understanding. I had spoken every name, unlocked every memory, exposed every truth I had buried like dead animals in the soil of my past. And still, one remained. One that wasn't a person, one that didn't have a name or a face, but it had always been with me, watching, breathing, waiting. It was the part of me I never admitted existed, the one that enjoyed the silence, the one that benefited from the knocking. I wanted to run, but where? There was nowhere left in the apartment I hadn't haunted with my own history. I turned slowly, expecting to see something horrific, something twisted or rotted or wrong, but I saw nothing, just the hallway, empty, still, and yet I knew it was there, because the weight didn't lift. If anything, it grew heavier. It didn't want to scare me anymore. It didn't need to. It had already won. What I thought was a haunting had been an excavation. Every knock, every whisper, every sound in the night, it wasn't torment. It was instruction, something guiding me deeper into myself. And now I had arrived at the center, at the truth I'd spent years circling around, but never facing head-on, that I hadn't just been hiding secrets. I had been using them to control, to manipulate, to survive. The worst secret wasn't what I had done. It was what I was still doing. I wore the trauma like armor. Let the shame become currency. I turned pain into performance, sadness into stories, not just for healing, but for power, for protection, for distance. I had crafted a version of myself that looked fragile on the outside, but was built like a vault, locked, impenetrable. I had made myself untouchable by making myself a victim. And that truth, that ugly, rotting truth, was the one the knocking had always been reaching for. Not the past, but the present. Not what I had hidden, but what I had become while hiding it. And then, the knock. One final knock. It came from the bathroom mirror. Not the wall, the mirror. And I knew what it meant. The knocking was over. The questions were done. Now it was my turn to look, to really look. I stepped in slowly. The mirror fogged slightly. Even though the air was still, my reflection stared back, tired, sunken, thin, from too many sleepless nights. But then the fog shifted. A new reflection appeared beside mine. Same face, same clothes, but different, clearer, more alert. It smiled, not kindly, but knowingly, like it had been waiting for me to see it all along. It didn't blink, didn't move, but its eyes, they were wide open. And then I heard it, my own voice, from its mouth. Now you know. The mirror shattered, not from impact, but from release, like it had been holding the tension for too long, like a bubble finally bursting. Tiny fragments scattered across the sink, the floor, my arms. I didn't bleed. The glass didn't cut. It just lay there, harmless now. The reflection was gone. Just me again, alone, but not untouched, because I couldn't unsee what I had seen, couldn't unknow what I now knew. The knocking would stop. I realized, not because it was finished with me, but because it had done its job. It had opened every door, pulled every silence into the light. And what came next would be my choice, not theirs. I didn't sleep that night. But for the first time, it wasn't because I was afraid. It was because I didn't want to forget. The stillness in the apartment felt different now. Not peaceful, but honest. Like the air had dropped its disguises. I sat in the dark, listening, not for sounds, but for absence. And I realized, the knocking, the whispers, the figures in the hall, they weren't here to harm me. They were here to prepare me. Because sometimes, the real horror isn't the haunting, it's the healing. It's what comes after the ghosts are gone, and you're left with nothing but yourself. No excuses, just the truth. And if you survive that, you can survive anything. When the sun rose, I walked to the door and opened it wide. Not because I was leaving, but because I was ready to let something in. Not a ghost, not a whisper, just light, just noise, just life. I knew there would be more silences, more secrets I hadn't yet uncovered. But I also knew something else now. I wasn't afraid of the knocking anymore, because it was never coming from something outside. It was always me, asking to be heard, demanding to be seen. And finally, I had listened. If this story gave you chills, then you're exactly where you need to be, because the knocking is only just beginning. These aren't just bedtime tales. They're slow-burning journeys into the secrets we bury and the shadows that remember. If you found yourself leaning in, holding your breath, or questioning the silence around you, then don't stop here. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because we're diving even deeper into the forgotten, the mysterious, and the things that whisper when the world goes quiet. This is where horror meets truth, and trust me, the next story might just know your secret.